Tonight, you're carrying questions that have no answers. Your mind circles and circles, searching for logic where logic cannot reach, trying to solve what cannot be solved through thinking alone. The harder you try to understand, the more exhausted you become. What if the deepest truths aren't meant to be grasped, but encountered? What if peace lives in the space where thinking ends? These are stories from the heart of Zen Koans that have traveled across centuries. Riddles that dissolve the mind's grip. Teachings that point beyond words. Tonight, we'll explore the beautiful paradoxes that ancient masters used to free their students from endless thinking. These aren't puzzles to solve. They're doorways to a different way of seeing, invitations to rest in mystery itself. Before we begin this journey together, I want you to know that this video offers contemplative stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom, created for rest and reflection, not medical or therapeutic advice. If you're managing sleep difficulties or other health concerns, please continue working with healthcare providers who can support you properly. If you find peace in these stories, if they help you rest, consider subscribing to this channel or pressing the like button. Your support helps others find their way to this quiet space. But there's no pressure, even that choice can wait. What matters most is that you're here now, ready to let go. Tonight promises something rare, permission to stop searching for answers. Through stories from Japan, China, Korea, and the wider Zen world, you'll meet monks and merchants, masters and wanderers, each encountering the beautiful absurdity of koans, those impossible questions that shatter logic and reveal something truer than reason. You'll discover how paradox itself becomes a teacher, how confusion can transform into clarity, how the mind learns to rest in not knowing. Let yourself settle into this moment. Feel the surface beneath you, the mattress, the pillow, the blankets. Notice how your body makes contact with what supports it. There's nowhere else you need to be. Nothing else you need to understand. Take a slow breath in, and as you exhale, let your shoulders drop just a little. The weight of the day can rest here. The questions that circled through your mind today can quiet now. You're not alone in this darkness. Across centuries, countless seekers have lain awake with the same restless questions, the same hunger for understanding. The masters who created these koans knew that exhaustion intimately. They knew how the thinking mind tangles itself in impossible knots. And they found a way through, not by thinking harder, but by discovering the silence that lives beneath all thought. So let the stories carry you. Let the ancient masters whisper their strange wisdom across time. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to solve anything. If your mind drifts, that's perfect. If you fall asleep halfway through a sentence, that's exactly what should happen. These teachings will find their way into you, whether you're awake or dreaming. Let's begin with a sound that cannot be heard, and a question that has no answer. In the mid-17th century, in the mountain temples of northern Japan, there lived a young monk named Kensho. He had come to Zen practice at 19, fleeing from his father's textile business in Kyoto, a world of accounts and negotiations, of careful measurements and profit margins. His father had trained him since childhood to calculate the value of silk thread by touch alone, to assess the quality of dye with a single glance, to negotiate prices with merchants who came from as far as Osaka and Nagasaki. The family business had been passed down for 4 generations, and everyone assumed Kensho would be the 5th. But Kensho had grown to hate the precision of it, the way everything could be weighed and measured and understood. He remembered watching his father examine a bolt of silk one afternoon, running his fingers along the weave with such focused attention that the whole world seemed to narrow down to those threads. His father could tell you where the silk came from, what the weather had been like when the silkworms spun their cocoons, whether the dye would hold its color for 20 years or fade in 10. Everything reduced to data, to knowledge, to certainty. Kensho wanted something his father's world couldn't measure. He'd heard whispers of Zen monks in the mountains, men who'd walked away from everything: wealth, status, family, to pursue something invisible, something that couldn't be bought or sold or passed down through generations. The idea had planted itself in his mind like a seed, and over months it grew until he couldn't ignore it anymore. So one autumn morning, just as dawn broke over the city and the first merchants were opening their shops, Kensho had left a note on his sleeping mat and walked away from the family compound. He'd taken nothing but the clothes he wore and a small bag with a spare robe. Some rice balls his mother had prepared the night before without knowing they'd be his last meal at home, and a small amount of money he'd saved from the allowance his father gave him. He'd climbed into the mountains until his legs ached, following paths that grew narrower and less defined, passing through villages that grew smaller and more remote, until finally, 3 days later, he'd found a small temple perched on a hillside where an old master named Hakuin accepted students. The temple was nothing like the grand monasteries in Kyoto, just a handful of simple wooden buildings, a meditation hall with a leaking roof, gardens that sprawled down the hillside in terraced levels, and perhaps 20 monks who lived in a silence so deep it felt like entering a different world. For 3 years, Kensho threw himself into practice with the same intensity his father had brought to the silk business. He sat zazen until his legs went numb and tears ran down his face from the pain. He worked in the gardens until his hands bled, pulling weeds from between the rows of radishes and beans, hauling water from the stream at the bottom of the hill, repairing stone walls that had stood for centuries. He memorized sutras until the words filled his dreams: the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, verses from the Platform Sutra, all of it lodging in his mind like music he couldn't unhear. He wanted desperately to understand. He approached Zen the way his father had taught him to approach business, with discipline, with strategy, with the absolute certainty that effort would yield results. If he just practiced hard enough, sat long enough, studied carefully enough, surely he would break through to whatever it was these other monks had found. But understanding kept eluding him. The other monks seemed to grasp something he couldn't see. They moved through their days with a lightness he envied, a humor that bubbled up at unexpected moments. When Master Hakuin gave talks in the evening, they would nod as if recognizing an old friend, occasionally breaking into laughter at something that sounded completely ordinary to Kensho. He felt like everyone was in on a joke he'd never heard. One evening in late spring, after the other monks had gone to sleep, Kensho found himself walking the temple grounds in frustration. Cherry blossoms drifted down in the darkness, catching moonlight as they fell, creating small pools of pale petals on the stone paths. The air smelled of rain approaching, that particular metallic scent that comes before a storm, mixed with the green smell of new leaves and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a stream rushed over stones. It should have been peaceful. The night was beautiful, the temple grounds serene. But Kensho felt only the familiar knot of failure tightening in his chest. That sensation he'd come to know well over these 3 years, the feeling of reaching for something just beyond his grasp, of almost understanding but never quite arriving. He found Master Hakuin sitting on the wooden platform outside his quarters, drinking tea and watching the night. The old man was wrapped in a dark robe, his shaved head catching the moonlight, his face deeply lined and peaceful. "Master," Kensho said, bowing low, "forgive me for disturbing you." Hakuin gestured for him to sit. You're not disturbing me. The night is large enough for both of us. Kensho sat on the edge of the platform. For a moment he didn't know how to begin. Then the words came tumbling out. Master, I've been practicing for 3 years now. I sit every day. I work in the gardens. I study the sutras. I do everything I'm supposed to do. But I still don't understand. Everyone else seems to see something I can't. What am I missing? Hakuin looked at him for a long moment. Then he poured a second cup of tea and handed it to Kensho. Tell me, Kensho, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Kensho blinked. The question seemed to come from nowhere. Master, I don't understand. One hand can't clap. It takes 2 hands to make a sound. Yes, Hakuin said, waving his hand dismissively. Of course it takes 2 hands to clap. Any child knows that. I'm not asking about 2 hands. I'm asking about 1 hand. What is its sound? But there is no sound. 1 hand is silent. Show me that silence, Hakuin said. Kensho sat there, utterly lost. I don't know, Master. Good, Hakuin said. Now go find out. For weeks afterward, the question consumed Kensho. He approached it the way he'd been taught to approach problems, by breaking it down, analyzing its components, testing different solutions. He tried clapping with 1 hand against his thigh. He held his hand in the air and listened intently. He searched through texts in the temple library. Every few days, he would return to Master Hakuin with a new answer. Master, the sound of 1 hand is the wind passing between the fingers. Hakuin would shake his head. Master, the sound of 1 hand is the silence before sound begins. Hakuin would ring a small bell and say, Next. Master, the sound of 1 hand is my own heartbeat. Hakuin would simply point to the door. The other monks started to notice Kensho's obsession. At meals, they'd see him staring at his hand. During work periods, he'd pause mid-task to hold his palm up to his ear. Some smiled sympathetically. They'd all wrestled with their own koans. Summer arrived, hot and heavy. Kensho sat zazen in the meditation hall, sweat running down his spine, his mind churning endlessly. What is the sound of 1 hand? The question repeated like a mantra he couldn't escape. He tried to concentrate on his breathing, but the koan kept surfacing, demanding attention. One afternoon, exhausted and desperate, Kensho walked away from the temple grounds and climbed higher into the mountains. He followed a narrow path through cedar forest, where the air was cooler and fragrant with sap and moss. He climbed for hours, not knowing where he was going, just needing to move. Eventually the path opened onto a small clearing with a view that stretched for miles, layer upon layer of forested ridges fading into blue distance. The sun was beginning to set, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Kensho sat down on a flat stone, utterly spent. I can't do this, he said aloud. I'm not smart enough. I'll never understand. And in that moment of complete surrender, something strange happened. His mind, which had been racing for months, simply stopped. Not because he forced it, not because he found an answer, but because there was no energy left to keep searching. The question didn't get answered. It just ceased to matter. He sat there in the cooling evening air, and for the first time in years, he wasn't trying to figure anything out. He was just there, breathing, aware, present. He noticed the way the light touched the distant mountains. He heard a crow calling somewhere below. He felt the rough stone beneath him, still warm from the day's sun. There was no problem to solve. There was only this, the raw fact of being alive, aware, present. When he returned to the temple after dark, he went straight to Master Hakuin's quarters. The old man was sitting in meditation, but he opened his eyes when Kensho entered. "Master," Kensho said quietly. Hakuin waited. Kensho raised his hand, just lifted it in the air, palm open, fingers slightly curved. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to explain. He just showed his hand, and in his eyes was something that hadn't been there before, a kind of spacious knowing. Hakuin looked at him, and then slowly, the old master smiled. "Ah," he said. "You've heard it." "I haven't heard anything, Master." "Exactly." Hakuin gestured for Kensho to sit. "For months you tried to find the sound of one hand through thinking. You approached it like a problem to solve. But the koan isn't a puzzle. It's a trap for your thinking mind. It's designed to be impossible, to exhaust every strategy your intellect can devise. And when your intellect finally gives up, when you stop trying to solve and simply meet the question directly, then you understand. "But I still don't know what the sound is," Kensho said. "Of course you don't. And you never will. That's the point. The sound of one hand clapping isn't a sound you can hear with your ears. It's not a concept you can grasp with your mind. It's the direct experience of reality before thinking divides it into subject and object, sound and silence. When you raised your hand just now, you weren't trying to give me an answer. You were showing me that you'd step beyond the need for answers." Kensho sipped the tea Hakuin poured for him, and it tasted different than it ever had before, more vivid somehow, more completely itself. "So all that time I spent searching was necessary," Hakuin said. "The koan has to exhaust you. It has to defeat every clever strategy. Only when you're completely empty can you see clearly. You can't think your way to truth. You can only exhaust thinking itself and discover what remains." They sat together in comfortable silence as the last light faded. Outside, crickets began their evening song. The temple bell rang for prayers, and Kensho understood, without understanding, that the sound of one hand was the sound of everything: the crickets, the bell, the silence between heartbeats, the simple presence that had been there all along. Take a breath now. Notice how that settles. Your mind has just traveled with Kensho through months of searching, felt his frustration and his final release. And perhaps you recognize something in his journey, the way we approach our own questions with the same desperate logic, the same conviction that if we just think hard enough, we'll finally understand. But what if understanding isn't the point? What if the questions that keep you awake at night, the ones about your life's direction, your relationships, your worth, your purpose, what if they're not meant to be solved through thinking at all? The koan of one hand clapping teaches us something profound about the nature of mind itself. When Kensho first heard the question, he tried to answer it the way he'd been trained, through analysis, through logic. This is how we're taught to approach everything in modern life. Got a question? Research it. Google it. Find the answer. Can't sleep? Figure out why. Analyze your stress. Create a solution. But some aspects of existence can't be captured in that net of thinking. Some truths live in the space before concepts form. The sound of one hand clapping is the sound of life before your mind labels it, interprets it, tries to make sense of it. Think about right now, this moment. You're lying here in the dark, and your mind might be trying to grasp what this story means. But what if you just stopped trying? What if you let the story wash over you without needing to comprehend it? What would remain? Your body breathing, the darkness around you, the simple fact of awareness itself, meeting this moment without commentary. That's the sound of one hand. Not a sound you hear, but the hearing itself when you lie awake at 3 in the morning. Mind racing with worries, that's your thinking. Mind trying to clap with 2 hands. It's trying to solve, to fix, to figure out, to create certainty where none exists. And the more it tries, the louder the noise becomes. But if you could rest in the question, instead of fighting for an answer, if you could hold your worry the way Kensho finally held his hand, open and present, without needing to resolve anything, you'd discover a different kind of knowing. Not the knowing that comes from having answers, but the knowing that comes from being willing to not know. The knowing that comes from being willing to not know. Feel your shoulders relax as you take that in. Let your jaw soften. You don't have to figure anything out right now. The questions can wait. They'll still be there tomorrow if you need them. But for now, let your mind rest in the mystery. Let it be okay that some things can't be understood. And as that permission settles into your body, as your breath deepens naturally, we travel now to another time, another place, where a different kind of impossible question waited for a different seeker. In 13th century China, in a small Chan monastery perched on the banks of the Yangtze River, there lived a nun named Miaozong. She had come to practice in her early 20s, escaping an arranged marriage to a provincial governor's son, a union her family had negotiated when she was still a child. Everyone had told her how fortunate she was. The governor's son was wealthy, educated, from a good family. But Miaozong had spent her engagement period watching her future husband, seeing how he spoke to servants, how he calculated every interaction for advantage, how he seemed to live entirely on the surface of life, never questioning, never wondering, never looking deeper. She'd broken the engagement 3 days before the wedding, which had caused a scandal that rippled through her entire province. Her father had stopped speaking to her. Her mother had wept for weeks. But Miaozong had felt nothing but relief as she walked away from that silk-draped mansion and into the world of wandering seekers. She'd found her way to this monastery by accident, following a river trader's directions to what she thought was a village, but turned out to be a collection of simple wooden buildings housing 30 monks and 5 other nuns, all studying under Master Wumen. He was an old man then, his face deeply lined, his movements slow but precise. When Miaozong had arrived, requesting to study, he'd looked at her for a long time before nodding once and assigning her a place in the women's quarters. That had been 5 years ago. In that time, Miaozong had proven herself a dedicated student. She sat zazen with fierce concentration. She worked harder than anyone in the gardens and kitchens. She memorized sutras with perfect accuracy. Master Wumen sometimes used her as an example when teaching the younger monks about diligence and commitment. But despite all her effort, Miaozong felt something missing. She could see it in the eyes of the senior students, a quality of ease, of humor, almost, as if they were in on some cosmic joke she hadn't heard yet. One humid evening in late summer, during the monastery's evening gathering, Master Wumen stood before the assembled students and said, "I have a question for all of you. Zhaozhou was once asked, 'Does a dog have Buddha nature?' And Zhaozhou answered, 'Mu, is.' Tell me, what did Zhaozhou mean?" Miaozong felt her spine straighten. She knew this koan. Buddha nature was the fundamental nature of all beings, the awakened awareness that exists in everything. Of course, a dog has Buddha nature. Everything has Buddha nature. That was basic teaching. So why did Zhao Zhou say mu, which meant no or nothing, or not? Over the following weeks, Master Wumen assigned this koan to different students, but Miaozong found herself obsessed with it, even though he hadn't specifically given it to her. She thought about it during meditation. She pondered it while weeding the vegetable garden. She turned it over in her mind as she washed dishes after the evening meal. The question seemed simple on the surface, but it opened into impossible paradoxes. If Buddha nature is in all things, then yes, obviously, a dog has Buddha nature. But Zhao Zhao said mu no. Was he denying basic teaching? Was he testing the questioner? Was mu something else entirely? She tried answering the question conceptually. Master Wumen, Zhao Zhou said mu because Buddha nature is beyond yes and no. Master Wumen had looked at her and said, "You're thinking about Buddha nature. Show me Buddha nature." She tried answering it experientially. She sat with the question until her mind grew quiet, until she felt a spacious awareness. She went to Master Wumen and said, "Buddha nature is this awareness right here." He'd rung a small bell and said, "That's your awareness." I asked about the dog. She even tried answering it with the single syllable mu, thinking perhaps the sound itself was the answer. Master Wumen had smiled and said, "Now you're just repeating Zhao Zhou." I didn't ask what Zhao Zhou said. I asked what he meant. Months passed. Autumn arrived, then winter. The Yangtze ran high and cold. Miaozong sat in the meditation hall, wrapped in layers of robes, her breath visible in the frigid air, and still the koan circled through her mind. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Mu. What did he mean? She began to feel a kind of desperation. She was smart. She was dedicated. Why couldn't she grasp this? The more she tried to understand, the more the koan seemed to slip away, like trying to grab water with your fingers. One morning in early spring, Miaozong was working alone in the monastery's small orchard, pruning apple trees. The work was meditative and physical, requiring attention but not thought. She'd been at it for hours, and her mind had grown quiet in the repetitive motion reach. Assess. Cut. She heard footsteps and looked down to see Master Wumen's old dog, Ba Jiao, padding through the grass toward her. He was a scruffy brown animal of uncertain ancestry, sweet-tempered and lazy, who spent most of his days sleeping in patches of sunlight around the monastery grounds. Ba Jiao stopped at the base of Miaozong's ladder, looked up at her, and yawned widely, his pink tongue curling. Then he scratched behind his ear with his back leg, making a rhythmic thumping sound. Then he circled twice and flopped down in the grass with a satisfied grunt, eyes already closing. And watching him, this ordinary dog doing ordinary dog things, something in Miaozong's mind just released. She saw Ba Jiao there in the grass, completely and utterly himself, not trying to have Buddha nature or not have Buddha nature, not trying to be spiritual or unspiritual, not trying to understand anything at all. Just being. Just this. Just dog. She climbed down the ladder very slowly. She sat in the grass next to Ba Jiao, who opened one eye to look at her, then closed it again. She reached out and placed her hand on his warm, breathing side. "Moo," she said softly. Later that day, she went to Master Wumen. He was sitting outside his quarters, mending a robe. "Master," she said, "I've seen it." "Seen what?" "The dog's Buddha nature." "Oh?" He continued sewing. And what did you see? Miaozong bent down, picked up a small stone from the path, and tossed it into the nearby pond. It made a soft splash. Ripples spread outward in perfect circles, each one following the last. The whole surface briefly alive with movement before settling back to stillness. She didn't say anything else. She just stood there watching the water. Master Wuman put down his sewing. He looked at her for a long moment, then at the pond, then back at her. "Ah," he said quietly. "Yes. I don't understand what Zhaozhou meant," Miaozong said. "I still can't explain it. But I don't need to anymore. Tell me what you know." Asking if a dog has Buddha nature is like asking if water has wetness. The question itself comes from thinking that Buddha nature is something that can be possessed or not possessed, something separate from the dog. But Buddha nature isn't a thing. It's not separate from the dog. The dog is just dog. The stone is just stone. The water is just water. Each thing completely itself, nothing lacking, nothing added. When Zhaozhou said mu, he wasn't saying no. He was cutting through the question itself, refusing to play the game of yes and no, having and not having. "And why did it take you so long to see this?" Master Wuman asked gently. "Because I was trying to find something. I kept searching for Buddha nature as if it were hidden somewhere, as if it were something special I needed to discover. I was looking past what was right in front of me, Bajiao scratching his ear, being perfectly himself. I was too busy trying to understand to simply see." Master Wuman nodded. "Bajiao is an excellent teacher. Better than me, perhaps. He's never once tried to explain Buddha nature." He picked up his sewing again. The word mu is sometimes translated as no, but it also means nothing, or not, or beyond distinction. Zhaozhou wasn't denying that the dog has Buddha nature. He was refusing the conceptual framework of the question itself. Because Buddha nature isn't something you have or don't have. It's what you are. What everything is. Miaozong sat down on the steps. She felt lighter than she had in months. A breeze moved through the courtyard. A bird sang its spring song. Everything was just itself. Nothing more and nothing less. And that was somehow enough. "Master," she said, "can I ask you something? If Buddha nature is what everything already is, why do we practice? Why sit zazen? Why study koans?" Wuman set down his sewing. "Good question. Do you have an answer?" Miaozong thought for a moment, then smiled. "We practice because we keep forgetting. We get lost in thoughts and concepts, lost in believing we're separate from what we're looking for. Practice is just remembering, over and over, what we already are." "Yes," Master Wuman said. "Although I might say it even more simply, we practice because we practice. The plum tree blooms in spring. The snow falls in winter. The dog scratches his ear. Why? There's no why. It's just what is." They sat together as the afternoon light slanted lower, and Miaozong understood, in a way that lived deeper than words, that every moment of her struggling had been Buddha nature too, the questioning, the frustration, the seeking, the recognition. All of it was just life being itself, perfect in its imperfection. From the orchard, Bajiao barked once at something only he could see, then settled back into sleep. And that, too, was the answer to every question. Feel the quiet that follows. Notice how your breathing has deepened. Let your eyes grow heavy if they want to. There's no need to hold on to any of this. The teaching finds its way in whether you remember or not. Miaozong's journey shows us something essential about seeking itself. We spend so much energy trying to find what we think we're missing: peace, understanding, worth, love, success. We approach life like it's a problem to solve, a puzzle that will finally make sense if we just think hard enough. But what if nothing is missing? What if you are already complete, already whole, already exactly what you need to be, right here in this moment? Not perfect in the sense of flawless, not finished in the sense of having nothing left to learn, but complete in the sense that nothing essential is lacking. You are, right now, Buddha nature being you. Life is Buddha nature being this moment. When you can't sleep and your mind races with worries about whether you're doing enough, being enough, achieving enough, that's the question. Does the dog have Buddha nature showing up in your life? You're asking, do I have worth? Do I have value? And the answer is mu, not because you don't have worth, but because the question itself comes from a misunderstanding. Worth isn't something you possess or lack. It's not something you earn or lose. You are worth, expressing itself as you. You are enough, by definition, because you are what is. The stone doesn't worry about whether it's a good enough stone. The bird doesn't lie awake, wondering if its song is valuable enough. The dog just scratches its ear when it itches. And you are just as much a natural expression of existence as the stone, the bird, the dog. Let that sink in, not as a concept to understand, but as a simple fact to rest in. Your body knows this already. It doesn't question its right to breathe, to digest food, to heal, to rest when tired. Your body just does what it does, naturally and without doubt. Can you let your mind rest in that same natural ease? As you exhale, release the question of whether you're enough. As you inhale, receive the simple fact of being alive. You don't have to understand. You just have to be here, breathing, aware. And as that invitation settles into your bones, as your body grows heavier against the surface beneath you, we turn now toward another impossible riddle, another ancient master pointing toward what cannot be grasped. In the mountains of 9th century China, there stood a monastery so remote that monks joked about it being halfway to heaven. The buildings clung to a steep hillside, connected by narrow paths and stone steps, surrounded by pine forest that stretched in every direction. This was where Master Dongshan taught, and where a young monk named Liang Ming had come to study 3 years earlier. Liang Ming had been born into a family of scholars in the capital city. His father was an imperial examiner, his grandfather a renowned poet. Everyone had expected Liang Ming to follow the family path, study the classics, pass the examinations, secure a position in the bureaucracy. And he'd tried. He'd spent years memorizing Confucian texts, practicing calligraphy until his fingers cramped. But something in him had resisted. The world of the capital seemed hollow to him, full of people saying what they were supposed to say, doing what they were supposed to do, wearing elaborate masks of propriety while their actual lives remained hidden underneath. He'd watched his father grow increasingly bitter over the years, watched his grandfather retreat into wine and nostalgia. He'd seen what a life of conformity cost. So, at 22, shortly before his final examinations, Liang Ming had simply walked away. He'd left a note apologizing to his parents, packed a small bag, and headed into the mountains. He'd wandered for months before hearing about Master Dongshan, a teacher known for his unconventional methods, his insistence that students discover truth directly. The first year at the monastery had been the happiest of Liang Ming's life. He'd loved the simplicity of the routine, rising before dawn, sitting zazen, working in the gardens. He'd loved the physical labor, the way his body grew strong from hauling water and splitting wood. Most of all, he'd loved the feeling that he was finally living authentically, stripped of pretense. But by the third year, a new restlessness had emerged. He was happy at the monastery, but he wondered if he was actually learning anything fundamental. He sat zazen faithfully, but what was it giving him? He worked hard, but was he any closer to awakening? Something essential still eluded him. One spring afternoon, Liangming found himself working alongside Master Dongshan in the monastery's vegetable garden. They were planting beans, working their way down a long row. For a while they worked in silence, just the sound of their digging and birds singing. Finally, Liangming worked up the courage to speak. "Master, may I ask you something?" I've been here 3 years now. I practice diligently. I follow the schedule. But I don't feel any different than when I arrived. I thought there would be some kind of transformation, some kind of awakening. But I just feel like the same person, doing different activities. Dongshan continued planting, pressing each bean into the soil with careful attention. After a moment he said, "Tell me, before you came to the monastery, did you know who you were?" "I suppose so. I was a scholar's son, a student preparing for examinations. And now I'm a monk, a student of Chan." Dongshan planted another bean. "So, you've traded one identity for another. One set of clothes for different clothes. But underneath the robes, is the person wearing them any different?" Liangming felt something twist in his chest. I don't know." "Good. That's a better answer than most people give." Dongshan straightened up, stretching his back. His hands were covered in soil. "Let me ask you something, Liangming. Before your parents were born, what was your original face?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Liangming stared at the master, completely bewildered. "Before my parents were born? Master, I didn't exist before my parents were born. How could I have had a face?" "Exactly," Dongshan said. "You didn't exist. So what was your face then?" "I don't. This doesn't make sense. You can't have a face if you don't exist." "Can't you?" Dongshan smiled. "Then tell me, what is your original face?" "My original face is my face now. The face I have. That's the face your parents gave you. That's the face that will age and wrinkle and eventually die. I'm asking about your original face, the one you had before your parents gave you this one. What did it look like?" Liangming felt frustration rising. "Master, you're asking me to describe something impossible. I can't remember a time before I was born. No one can." Logic." Dongshan bent back to his planting. "Yes, logic says it's impossible. But I'm not asking about logic. I'm asking about your original face. Go find it and show me." For days afterward, Liangming walked around feeling irritated and confused. The koan made no sense. It was just word games, philosophical nonsense. Before his parents were born, he hadn't existed. Therefore, he had no face then. Therefore, there was nothing to show. The whole question was absurd, but despite his irritation, the koan wouldn't leave him alone. It circled through his mind during meditation. It surfaced during meals. It woke him in the middle of the night. What was his original face? He tried various approaches. Maybe original face meant Buddha nature? He went to Dongshan and said, "Master, my original face is Buddha nature, the true self that exists beyond birth and death." Dongshan had looked at him sadly and said, "That's a nice concept, but Buddha nature doesn't have a face. Try again. Maybe it meant emptiness? Master, my original face is emptiness before form arises, before distinction exists." Dongshan had tapped him gently on the head with a stick and said, "Emptiness is empty. It doesn't look back at you from the mirror." Next. Maybe it was a trick question, and the answer was that there was no answer? Liang Ming tried approaching the master with silence, just bowing and saying nothing. Dongshan had laughed and said, "Silence is good, but I asked you to show me your face, not your lack of words. Keep looking." Weeks became months. Summer arrived, hot and thick with moisture. Liang Ming sat in the meditation hall, sweat running down his ribs, and the koan sat with him before your parents were born. What was your original face? Before you existed, who were you? Before this body, this mind, this identity, what remained? The question started to work on him at a level deeper than thought. It wasn't just an intellectual puzzle anymore. It was pointing at something about the nature of existence itself, the nature of self. Everything Liang Ming thought of as I or me or Liang Ming, all of that, had started with birth, would end with death. But the master was asking about something prior to that, something original. One morning in late summer, Liang Ming woke before dawn and went to sit by the stream that ran below the monastery. The sky was just beginning to lighten, stars still visible overhead. The water moved past, constant and changing, each moment a new flow, but somehow always the same stream. He sat very still, watching, not thinking about the koan, but just present with the water, the pre-dawn air, the slowly brightening sky. And in that stillness, something shifted. He looked down at his reflection in a calm pool beside the stream, his face wavering slightly in the water. There and not there, form appearing in emptiness. And he understood suddenly that the reflection wasn't his face. His face was what created the reflection. But his face wasn't him either. It was what appeared when light struck form, when awareness looked out through these particular eyes. So what was looking? What was aware, right now, of this reflection? This stream, this dawn? Not the reflection, not the face, not Liang Ming, because Liang Ming was just a name given to this body-mind. And before this body existed, that awareness had been. What? Where? The question dissolved. The answer wasn't in time, not before or after. The answer wasn't in space, not here or there. The original face was never born, would never die, had no features to describe, yet was somehow the source of all seeing, all knowing, all experiencing. It was what remained when you stripped away every layer of identity, every concept of self. Every story about who you were, just pure awareness itself. Vast and empty and utterly ordinary. Liang Ming sat by the stream as the sun rose, painting the water gold, and he felt like he'd been carrying a heavy bag his entire life and had only just now discovered he could set it down. The person he thought he was with all his history, his disappointments, his seeking all of that, was like waves on the ocean's surface. But the ocean itself, the awareness in which all those waves arose, that was his original face. That had always been there, would always be there, unchanged by any of the forms it took. When he went to Master Dongshan later that morning, he found the old teacher sweeping leaves from the courtyard. "Master," Liangming said. Dongshan kept sweeping. "Yes, I've found it." "Found what?" "My original face." "Oh, show me." Liangming looked at Dongshan, at the way morning light caught the dust particles in the air, at the rhythmic movement of the broom, at the whole scene: teacher, student, courtyard, light, awareness, beholding all of it. He picked up a second broom leaning against the wall and began sweeping alongside the master. They worked together in silence for several minutes. Then Dongshan stopped, leaned on his broom, and looked at Liangming with a slight smile. "Ah, there you are. I was always here," Liangming said. "Yes, but you kept looking for someone else, didn't you? You kept searching for some special face, some enlightened version of yourself. You wanted to find Buddha nature or emptiness or awakening something extraordinary. But your original face isn't extraordinary. It's completely ordinary. It's just this awareness being aware, life being alive, this moment being exactly what it is. I wasted so much time," Liangming said quietly. "Did you?" Dongshan resumed sweeping. "You couldn't have seen this without first exhausting every other place you might look. You had to search everywhere else before you could recognize that what you sought was the seeker itself. That's not wasted time. That's the path." They continued sweeping as the monastery woke around them, other monks emerging for morning practice, birds calling in the trees, the smell of breakfast being prepared. Everything utterly ordinary, everything exactly as it should be. Later, as they put away their brooms, Dongshan said, "The question about your original face isn't asking about some mystical pre-existence. It's asking you to recognize what you are beyond all the stories, all the identities, all the constructed selves. Before your parents gave you a body and a name, before society gave you a role, what remains? That's your original face. Not a face at all, really. Just this aware presence, here, now, exactly as it always has been." Liangming bowed to his teacher, and for the first time since arriving at the monastery, he understood that he hadn't come here to become someone different. He'd come to recognize who he'd always been, underneath all the costumes and performances. Just this, just awareness, just life, being itself, perfectly ordinary and perfectly complete. Let that story settle. Feel the weight of your body against the mattress. Notice how your breath moves in and out without any effort from you. If your eyes are closed, let them stay closed. If they're open, let them soften and blur. Liangming's question is your question too. Before all the stories you tell yourself about who you are, before all the roles you play, before all the identities you've accumulated, who are you? Really? What remains when you strip everything away? Not the job title, not the relationships, not the achievements or failures, not even your name or your history. What's here, underneath all of that? What's aware of reading these words right now? What's breathing? What's listening to the sounds around you? That's your original face. And it's been here all along, constant and unchanging, watching as your life unfolds, as thoughts come and go, as the body ages, as circumstances shift. It's the awareness in which everything appears. It's what you are, not what you have. Think about all the versions of yourself you've been: the child, the teenager, the young adult, all the different phases of life. They all felt like you at the time. But what stayed the same through all those changes? The awareness, the presence, the simple fact of being conscious, being here, being alive. That awareness doesn't age. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't worry or plan or regret. It just is. And when you rest in that awareness, when you recognize it as your original face, there's a profound peace. Because nothing can threaten it. Nothing can diminish it. It was never born, so it can never die. It's your true home, always accessible, always here. Right now, let yourself rest as that awareness. Not trying to be anything. Not trying to understand anything. Just being. Just this. Just the simple presence that's been here before this body formed. That will be here after this body dissolves. That's here now. Breathing. Aware. Perfectly still underneath all the movement of life. Let your shoulders drop. Let your belly soften. You don't have to be anyone right now. You don't have to do anything. You can just be this pure presence, aware and at peace. Your original face finally revealed in its beautiful simplicity. And as that recognition deepens, as your body releases into complete rest, we move gently toward one more story, one more ancient teaching to carry you deeper into sleep. In early 10th century Korea, in the Seon monastery of Bongamsa, nestled high in the Taebaek Mountains, there lived a monk named Wulmyong, whose name meant moon clarity. He had received this name from his teacher, not because he possessed any particular clarity, but as a challenge, an aspiration to grow into. Wulmyong had come to the monastery at 16, fleeing from a life that had felt suffocating in its ordinariness. His family had been farmers for generations, working the same terraced rice fields his great-great-grandfather had carved into the hillside. Every season followed the same pattern, planting in spring, weeding in summer, harvesting in autumn, resting in winter. His father would wake before dawn, work until his back ached, eat a simple meal, sleep, and wake to do it all again. His mother tended the vegetables, raised the chickens, mended clothes worn thin, cooked the same dishes her mother had taught her. There was nothing wrong with this life. His parents were good people, kind to their neighbors, honest in their dealings. But watching them year after year, Wulmyong had felt a growing panic. Is this all there is? Wake, work, eat, sleep, die. Surely life held something more than this endless repetition, this grinding sameness. He'd felt like he was slowly suffocating under the weight of predictability. So, one spring morning, without telling his parents, he'd walked away from the rice fields and climbed into the mountains until he found Bongamsa. The abbot, an ancient monk named Haeguk, had taken one look at him and said, "You're running from something." Wulmyong had nodded. "I'm running from ordinariness, from a life that means nothing." Haeguk had smiled slightly. "Good luck with that. Ordinariness will follow you here too. But come in anyway. Maybe you'll learn something." For 8 years, Wulmyong had practiced with dedication that impressed even the senior monks. He threw himself into every aspect of monastery life with fierce intensity. He sat meditation sessions that lasted for hours, his legs screaming with pain, but his spine remaining straight. He performed the most menial tasks, cleaning the outhouses, scrubbing pots, hauling firewood with the same meticulous attention he brought to studying sutras. He memorized hundreds of pages of scripture, learned the ceremonial chants, mastered the formal prostrations. He was searching for something extraordinary, something that would justify his choice to leave his family, something that would prove life held more than ordinary existence. He wanted enlightenment, awakening, transformation, whatever you called, that magical moment when everything suddenly made sense and you became someone special, someone who transcended the mundane world. But the extraordinary moment never came. He just kept waking up, sitting, working, eating, sleeping. Different location, different robes, same basic pattern. The monastery began to feel uncomfortably similar to his family's farm, the same routines, the same repetitive tasks, the same faces day after day. He'd traded rice fields for temple halls, but had anything fundamental actually changed? One autumn afternoon, Wolmyong was assigned to work in the monastery's large kitchen garden with Master Higuk. They were harvesting radishes, pulling them from the earth and trimming off the greens. It was mindless work, the kind Wolmyong had come to both appreciate and resent, simple enough not to require much thought, but also offering nothing that felt spiritually significant. After they'd been working in silence for perhaps an hour, Wolmyong found himself unable to contain his frustration any longer. "Master Heguk," he said, his voice tight. "May I ask you something?" The old monk continued pulling radishes, his gnarled hands steady. "Of course. I've been here 8 years. I practice every day. I do everything I'm supposed to do. But I don't feel any different. I left my family's farm because I couldn't stand the ordinariness of it, the same tasks repeated endlessly. No meaning, no transcendence. But here I am, pulling radishes, just like my father pulled rice plants. Where's the extraordinary life I came here to find? Where's the awakening? Where's the transformation?" Heguk sat back on his heels, brushing dirt from his hands. His face was weathered like old wood, deeply lined, but his eyes were sharp and present. "Tell me, Wolmyong, when you're eating rice, where are you?" Wolmyong blinked at the apparent non sequitur. "When I'm eating rice, I suppose I'm in the dining hall? I didn't ask where your body is. I asked where you are. I don't understand the question, Master. It's a simple question. When you're eating, where are you? When you're sleeping, where are you? When you're pulling radishes, where are you?" Wolmyong thought for a moment, trying to grasp what the master was asking. "I suppose when I'm eating, I'm thinking about other things, planning my day, or replaying conversations, or worrying about my practice. When I'm sleeping, I'm not really anywhere. I'm unconscious. When I'm pulling radishes, I'm wishing I was doing something more meaningful." "Ah," Higuk nodded slowly. "So when you're eating, you're not eating. When you're sleeping, you're not sleeping. When you're pulling radishes, you're not pulling radishes. You're always somewhere else, looking for something else. Is that right?" "I suppose so," Wolmyong admitted. "Then let me give you a teaching," Higuk said. "This is the most important teaching I can give you. So listen carefully. When eating, just eat. When sleeping, just sleep. When pulling radishes, just pull radishes." Wolmyong stared at him, waiting for more. But the master had turned back to his work, pulling another radish from the earth, shaking off the excess dirt, trimming the greens with quick, efficient movements. "Master, I don't understand." "That's it? That's the teaching? Just do what you're doing? Is there something more complicated needed?" But that's what my parents did. That's what I left home to escape. Just doing the same ordinary things over and over, never questioning. never seeking anything deeper. I came here to find enlightenment, to discover something extraordinary, to transcend ordinary existence. And you're telling me to just do ordinary things? Haeguk looked at him with something like compassion. You think your parents were just doing ordinary things? Tell me, when your father planted rice, was he thinking about yesterday's argument or tomorrow's harvest? Or was he just planting rice? Each seed placed with care, his full attention on the task? Woo-myung thought back, trying to remember. He could picture his father in the rice paddy, bent over the rows, moving with practiced efficiency. And he realized his father had been completely present in those moments, not thinking about enlightenment or meaning or transcendence, just planting, just completely there. I think he was just planting. And when your mother cooked, was she wishing she was doing something more spiritual? Or was she fully present with the vegetables she was chopping, the soup she was stirring? Again, the memory came clearly. His mother at the hearth, tending the fire, stirring the pot, her movements economical and sure, her attention completely absorbed in the task, not seeking anything else, not wishing to be somewhere else, just completely there, completely cooking. She was just cooking, Woo-myung said quietly. Then perhaps, Haeguk said gently, your parents were more awakened than you realized. And perhaps you left home not to escape ordinariness, but because you couldn't see the extraordinary that was right in front of you. The words hit Woo-myung like a physical blow. He sat there in the dirt, surrounded by harvested radishes, and felt something crack open in his chest. All these years, he'd been searching for something special, something different, something more. He'd looked at his parents' lives with contempt, seeing only meaningless repetition. He'd come to the monastery expecting to find something magical, something that would elevate him above ordinary existence. But the teaching was the opposite of what he'd expected. Not transcendence, not escape, just complete presence. Just eating when eating, sleeping when sleeping, pulling radishes when pulling radishes. His parents had been doing it all along, not because they were unenlightened, but because that's what awakening actually looked like. Complete intimacy with each moment. No resistance, no seeking, just total presence with what is. Master, Woo-myung said, his voice shaking slightly. I think I've wasted 8 years. Have you? Haeguk smiled. Those 8 years of seeking, of striving, of wanting something more that was also just your life, unfolding exactly as it needed to unfold. You couldn't have understood this teaching 8 years ago. You had to exhaust yourself seeking the extraordinary before you could recognize that the ordinary is the extraordinary. Nothing wasted. Just life being life. But how do I do it? How do I just eat when I'm eating? Just sleep when I'm sleeping? My mind is always wandering, always seeking, always somewhere else. Practice, Haeguk said simply. Each time you notice you're not present, just come back. When you're eating and you realize you're thinking about tomorrow, just come back to tasting, to chewing, to swallowing. When you're walking and you realize you're lost in thought, just come back to the sensation of your feet touching the ground. Over and over, 1,000 times a day, 10,000 times, just coming back to what is actually happening right now. That's all? That's everything. Haeguk pulled another radish. This radish in my hand, do you think it's an ordinary radish or an extraordinary radish? Woo-myung looked at the radish. It was just a radish-white root, green stems, bits of dirt clinging to it. Nothing special about it. But as he looked, really looked, he started to see it differently. This radish had grown from a tiny seed. It had pushed through the earth towards sunlight. It had drawn water and minerals up through its roots, had transformed soil and sun into this firm white flesh. It was a miracle of existence, this radish. Not extraordinary in the sense of being unusual, there were hundreds more in the garden, but extraordinary in the sense of being completely itself, perfectly radish, nothing lacking, nothing extra. It's both? Wulmyong said tentatively. No. Haeguk said, it's neither. Those are just words, just concepts. The radish is just radish. Your thinking mind wants to categorize it as ordinary or extraordinary, special or mundane. But the radish itself isn't concerned with your categories. It's just completely, utterly radish. He handed the radish to Wulmyong. When you can hold this radish with the same attention you'd give to a sacred text, when you can pull radishes with the same presence you bring to meditation, when you can wash dishes and sweep floors and haul firewood with your whole being, not because these tasks are spiritual practices, but because they're what's happening right now, then you'll understand what your parents understood. And you'll understand why I named you Moon Clarity. Not because you have clarity, but because clarity is what happens when the mind stops seeking and settles, like the moon reflecting perfectly in still water. They continued working in silence, but something had shifted in Wulmyong. Each radish he pulled became an entire universe, the weight of it in his hand, the texture of the root, the snap of the greens as he trimmed them, the afternoon sun on his back, the smell of earth, the sound of birds somewhere in the trees, all of it vivid, immediate, complete. That evening at dinner, Wulmyong ate his rice with a kind of attention he'd never brought to eating before. He tasted each grain, felt the texture change as he chewed, noticed the simple satisfaction of swallowing, the warmth spreading through his body. He was just eating. Nothing special, nothing transcendent. Just completely, utterly eating. And somehow, that was more profound than any mystical experience he'd been seeking. After dinner, he went to Master Haeguk's room and bowed deeply. Master, thank you for the teaching. What teaching? Haeguk asked innocently. We were just pulling radishes. Yes, Wulmyong said, smiling. Just pulling radishes. Over the following months and years, Wulmyong continued his practice, but it had become something entirely different. He still sat zazen, but he wasn't sitting to achieve enlightenment. He was just sitting, feeling his breath, feeling his body, feeling the air around him. He still worked in the gardens, but he wasn't working to accumulate merit or demonstrate diligence. He was just working, digging, planting, weeding, harvesting, each action complete in itself. Sometimes he would think of his parents, and instead of the contempt or pity he'd once felt, he felt profound respect. They had known something he'd had to travel far and search long to rediscover. When his father planted rice, he was fully planting rice. When his mother cooked, she was fully cooking. They hadn't needed monasteries or teachers or special practices. They'd simply been present with their lives, with whatever task was in front of them. Years later, when Wulmyong had become a senior monk and began teaching students himself, he would often give them the same teaching Master Haeguk had given him. When eating, just eat. When sleeping, just sleep. When pulling radishes, just pull radishes. And like he had, most of them would look confused or disappointed, seeking something more complicated, more impressive, more extraordinary. But occasionally, one of them would truly hear it, would understand that this simple teaching, this impossibly simple, impossibly difficult teaching was the whole path. And Wolmyong would see in their eyes the same recognition he'd had that day in the garden. That ordinary life, lived with complete presence, was the awakened life. That there was no separation between sacred and mundane, between enlightenment and everyday existence. That eating was just eating, sleeping was just sleeping, and that was somehow everything. Take a slow breath. Feel how your body has settled even deeper into rest. Your mind has traveled with Wolmyong through years of seeking, felt his frustration at finding only ordinariness, and witnessed his recognition that ordinariness itself was what he'd been searching for all along. Notice what's happening right now. You're lying here. You're breathing. That's all. And yet your mind might be trying to make this moment into something more, trying to extract meaning from the story, trying to figure out how to apply the teaching, trying to understand what it all means for your life tomorrow. But what if this moment doesn't need to mean anything more than it already does? You're here. You're breathing. Your body is resting. That's enough. That's complete. That's the whole universe. Right here, right now. When Wolmyong learned that eating is just eating, he discovered something that changes everything and changes nothing. It changes everything because suddenly every moment becomes vivid and complete, no longer just a stepping stone to some future moment that will finally be good enough. But it changes nothing because rice is still rice. Sleep is still sleep. Radishes are still radishes. Life goes on exactly as before, except you're finally present for it. Think about your own days. How often are you actually present for your life? When you're eating breakfast, are you tasting your food or scrolling through your phone? When you're in the shower, are you feeling the water or rehearsing a conversation? When you're with people you love, are you actually there or thinking about what you need to do next? We spend so much of our lives waiting for some other moment, waiting for the weekend, for the promotion, for the relationship, for the achievement that will finally make us happy. And in the waiting, we miss the only moment that actually exists, this one. The teaching isn't to stop planning or stop hoping or stop working toward things. It's simply to be present for whatever's actually happening. When you're planning, just plan. When you're hoping, just hope. When you're working, just work. Give yourself completely to whatever this moment holds, and then completely to the next moment when it arrives. Right now, just rest. Just let your body be heavy. Just feel your breath moving in and out. You don't have to understand anything. You don't have to become anything. You don't have to be anywhere other than here. Just this. Just breathing. Just resting. Just this moment, exactly as it is, needing nothing added, nothing taken away. And as your body releases more deeply into the surface beneath you, as your breath slows and softens, we turn toward one final story for this part of our journey. One more teaching whispered across centuries. In a small village in 14th century Japan, there lived a tea merchant named Takeda who supplied leaf to the monasteries and temples throughout the region. He was a practical man, good at business, respected in the community. He had a wife he loved, 3 healthy children, a comfortable home. By any measure, he was successful. But something troubled him, a question that wouldn't leave him alone. Takeda had grown up hearing stories about Zen monks who achieved extraordinary states of consciousness, masters who could predict the future, who understood the deepest mysteries of existence, who possessed wisdom that set them apart from ordinary people. And he wondered, what made them different? What did they know that he didn't? Was there some secret teaching, some special practice that transformed a person from ordinary to awakened? His business brought him into regular contact with monks. Every month, he would deliver tea to various temples, and he'd watch the monks moving through their routines, sitting in meditation, performing ceremonies, studying texts. They seemed peaceful, certainly, focused. But were they really so different from him? Did they possess some special knowledge he lacked? The question gnawed at him. He was a good person. He worked hard. He treated people fairly. But was he wasting his life in ordinary concerns while these monks pursued something higher, something more meaningful? Should he, perhaps, give up his business and become a monk himself? The thought both attracted and terrified him. One year, when Takeda was in his mid-40s, a famous Zen master named Ikkyu came to the region. Ikkyu was known throughout Japan as an eccentric but profound teacher, someone who'd achieved complete awakening but refused to act in conventionally holy ways. He'd been a high-ranking monk but had given up his position, saying the religious establishment had become too concerned with formality and forgotten the essence of practice. Now he wandered freely, sometimes staying in temples, sometimes in sake houses, teaching whoever was ready to learn. When Takeda heard that Master Ikkyu was visiting a nearby temple, he immediately made arrangements to visit. He prepared his finest tea as a gift, dressed in his best clothes, and made the day's journey to the temple, his heart beating fast with anticipation. This was his chance to ask the question that had haunted him for years. What is the difference between an awakened person and an ordinary person like me? He arrived at the temple in the late afternoon. The monks told him that Master Ikkyu was in the garden and would receive visitors there. Takeda found him sitting on a stone bench, watching the late light filter through pine trees. Ikkyu was perhaps 60, his face deeply lined, but somehow youthful, his eyes bright with what might have been amusement or mischief. Takeda approached nervously, bowed deeply, and presented his gift of tea. Master Ikkyu, I am honored to meet you. I am Takeda, a tea merchant. I have brought you a small gift, my finest leaves, harvested last spring from the mountains near my village. Ikkyu accepted the package, smelled it appreciatively, and nodded. Thank you. Good tea is one of life's genuine pleasures. Please, sit. Takeda sat on the ground near the bench, trying to find the right words. Master, I have a question that has troubled me for many years. I hope you can help me understand. I'll try. What troubles you, Master? I've lived my whole life as an ordinary person. I sell tea. I raise my family. I do my business. But I wonder, am I wasting my life? Should I be seeking awakening instead? What is the difference between someone like you, who has achieved enlightenment, and someone like me, who just lives an ordinary life? Ikkyu looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. An excellent question. Let me answer it precisely. The difference between an awakened person and an unawakened person is this. Before awakening, you chop wood and carry water. After awakening, you chop wood and carry water. Takeda blinked, confused. He'd traveled a full day to hear this. Master, I don't understand. If awakened people do the same things as ordinary people, chop wood, carry water, sell tea, raise families, then what's the point? What changes? Everything, Ikkyu said. And nothing. The actions are the same. Wood is still chopped. Water is still carried. But the one doing the chopping and carrying everything is different for them. But how? What's different? Ikkyu stood up, stretched, and said, "Come, let's walk in the garden. I'll show you rather than tell you." They walked together through the temple gardens as the afternoon faded toward evening. Ikkyu moved slowly, stopping frequently to look at things: a particular rock, a patch of moss, a spider's web catching the light. At one point, he stopped beside a small pond and said, "Look at this water, Takeda." "What do you see?" Takeda looked. "I see water, the reflection of the sky, some fish. Yes, yes. But look more carefully. What is water doing? It's just sitting there, being water?" "Exactly." Ikkyu clapped his hands together, delighted. "It's just being water. The sky reflects in it. Does the water try to hold on to that reflection? A fish swims through. Does the water cling to the fish? Wind disturbs the surface. Does the water resist? No. Water just receives whatever comes, reflects whatever appears, and lets it all go without attachment. Water is never not water. You see, it doesn't pretend to be anything else." They walked on. Ikkyu stopped beside a pine tree, placed his hand on its bark. "And this tree, what is it doing? Growing?" Takeda suggested. "Yes, just being completely, utterly tree. Not trying to be an oak. Not wishing it were taller or shorter. Not worried about whether it's a good enough tree. Just doing what trees do, growing, existing, being exactly what it is. The tree doesn't have Buddha nature as something separate from itself. The tree is Buddha nature, being tree." They continued walking. The light was fading now, shadows lengthening. "So let me ask you," Ikkyu said, "when you sell tea, what are you doing?" "I'm selling tea," Takeda said, uncertain where this was leading. "Are you? Or are you worrying about the price, thinking about your competitor down the street, wondering if the customer likes you, calculating your profit, wishing you were doing something more spiritual?" Takeda felt his face flush. "I suppose, yes, I'm usually thinking about all those things." "So, you're not selling tea. You're lost in thoughts about selling tea. The water just waters. The tree just trees." But Takeda doesn't just Takeda. Takeda is busy being somewhere else, being someone else, doing something else, at least in his mind. They had arrived at the temple's tea room. Ikkyu gestured for Takeda to enter. Inside, a simply brazier, a pot, cups. "You brought me excellent tea," Ikkyu said. "Let's prepare some together." What followed was unlike any tea ceremony Takeda had experienced. Ikkyu moved through the preparation with complete attention, but without any of the formal precision Takeda had seen in ceremonial tea gatherings. He heated the water, measured the tea leaves, poured all with a kind of relaxed presence that made each movement seem both casual and perfect. "Watch," Ikkyu said. "When I pour this water, am I thinking about my reputation as a Zen master? Am I worried about doing it correctly? Am I wishing I was somewhere else, doing something more important? No, I'm just pouring water. This moment, this action, is the entire universe. Nothing lacking, nothing extra." He handed a cup to Takeda. "Now you drink. Don't think about drinking. Don't analyze the flavor. Don't worry about whether you're appreciating it correctly. Just drink. Just let the tea be tea and let yourself be yourself. Drinking tea. Takeda took the cup. He started to sip it as he normally would, quickly, thinking already about what he would say next. Then he stopped. He looked at the tea, really looked at it. The color, the slight steam rising, the warmth of the cup in his hands. He brought it to his lips, slowly, tasted it, let the flavor fill his mouth, swallowed, felt the warmth move down his throat. For just that moment, he wasn't Takeda the tea merchant. He wasn't a man with worries and questions. He wasn't someone seeking awakening or wondering if his life had meaning. He was just this tasting, swallowing, feeling warmth, just completely present, just completely here. When he looked up, Ikkyu was smiling at him. "There," the master said gently. "You just experienced awakening. That moment when you were just drinking, just completely present with the tea, that's it. That's the difference I was telling you about." "But that was just one moment," Takeda protested. "Already my mind is back to its usual thinking." "Of course," Ikkyu said. "That's what minds do. They think. That's not the problem. The problem is believing that thinking is more real than this moment. The problem is being so lost in thoughts that you miss your actual life. So awakening isn't a permanent state where you never think again. Awakening is recognizing that this moment exactly as it is, with or without thoughts, is complete. You're already living your awakened life. Takeda. You've always been living it. You're just usually not present for it. You're selling tea while thinking about profit instead of just selling tea. You're with your wife while thinking about work instead of just being with your wife. You're walking while lost in worries instead of just walking. Ikkyu poured more tea. Before awakening, you chop wood and carry water while lost in thoughts about how you should be doing something more spiritual. After awakening, you chop wood and carry water, fully present, and discover that chopping wood and carrying water are the spiritual practice. There's nowhere else to be, nothing else to achieve. Just this moment, completely lived. "But Master," Takeda said, "don't you meditate? Don't you study? Aren't there practices to maintain this awakening?" "I sit when I sit. I study when I study. But I don't sit to become awakened. I sit because sitting is what's happening. When you sell tea, do you sell tea to become a tea seller? No, you already are a tea seller. And selling tea is just what tea sellers do. Similarly, I already am awake, and practice is just what awake beings do. Not to get somewhere else, but as an expression of what's already here." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking tea as the last light faded from the sky. Finally, Takeda said quietly, "I've been looking for something extraordinary while living in an extraordinarily ordinary way, not present, not here, always somewhere else in my mind. And the awakened life I was seeking is just being completely present for the ordinary life I already have." "Yes," Ikkyu said simply. "Your life is your practice. Your work is your meditation. Your family is your sangha. Your village is your monastery. You don't need to become a monk or achieve special states or understand secret teachings. You just need to wake up to the life you're already living. When selling tea, just sell tea. When with your children, just be with your children. When worried, just be worried, completely worried. Not worried about being worried." "That sounds so simple," Takeda said. "It is simple," Ikkyu agreed. "It's just not easy. Your mind has spent 45 years practicing being elsewhere. It will take practice to keep coming back to here. but every moment is a chance to practice. Every cup of tea, every transaction, every breath. Takeda bowed deeply. Thank you, Master. I understand. Do you? Ikkyu smiled. Or do you think you understand? Never mind. Understanding is overrated anyway. Just go home. Hug your wife. Play with your children. Sell your tea. Live your life. That's the teaching. Takeda began the journey home as night fell completely, stars appearing overhead. But he traveled differently than he'd arrived. He noticed his feet touching the ground. He felt the cool evening air on his face. He heard the night sounds, insects, wind in trees, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. He wasn't trying to be mindful. He was just walking, just completely there with each step. When he reached home well after midnight, his wife woke and asked how the journey had been. Did you meet the famous master? Did he give you the answers you were seeking? Takeda smiled. He gave me the question I'd been asking wrong. I asked what the difference was between an awakened person and an ordinary person. And he showed me that awakened people are ordinary people who are actually present for their ordinary lives. So you traveled a whole day for that? She asked, teasing gently. Yes, Takeda said, pulling her close. And it was worth it. Because now I'm here with you. Really here. Not lost in my thoughts about where I should be or what I should be doing. Just here. Just us. Just this. In the years that followed, Takeda continued to sell tea. He didn't become a monk. He didn't achieve any special powers or profound insights that set him apart. But people who did business with him noticed something had changed. He was more present, more attentive, less hurried. When you spoke with him, he really listened. When he prepared tea, he did it with a kind of care that made the tea taste better somehow. And when his children asked him, years later, what the most important thing he'd learned in life was, he told them, before I met Master Ikkyu, I sold tea and raised you children. After I met Master Ikkyu, I sold tea and raised you children. The difference is that now I'm actually here while I'm doing it. And that changes everything. Let that settle into your body now. Feel how heavy you've become, how completely your weight is supported by what's beneath you. If you're still holding on to any of these stories, trying to remember them or understand them, you can let that go now. Let the stories dissolve like dreams. What remains is simpler than any story. You're here. You're breathing. Right now, this moment, exactly as it is, this is your life. Not a preparation for life. Not a stepping stone to some better moment. This is it. This breathing, this awareness, this exact now. And there's nothing you need to add to it. You don't need to understand the teachings to benefit from them. You don't need to become more awakened or more mindful or more anything. You're already complete, already whole, already exactly what this moment needs you to be. When Takeda learned that awakening was just being present for ordinary life, he discovered what you can discover right now, that this moment is enough. Your life, exactly as it is enough. You, exactly as you are enough. Tomorrow you'll wake up and return to your ordinary life. You'll have the same work, the same challenges, the same relationships. Nothing external will have changed. But you have this invitation now, repeated in 4 different ways across 4 different centuries, to actually be present for your life. To drink tea when you're drinking tea. to walk when you're walking, to rest when you're resting. Right now, just rest. Don't try to rest better or more deeply. Don't monitor whether you're doing it right. Just let your body be heavy. Let your breath be slow. Let your mind be however it is, thinking or quiet, peaceful or restless. It doesn't matter. All of it is just weather passing through the vast sky of awareness. You are that sky, spacious enough to hold everything: thoughts and silence, dreams and waking, questions and answers, and the space beyond questions. You've always been that sky. You'll always be that sky. And right now, the sky is simply resting, breathing, being exactly what it is. Nothing lacking, nothing extra. Just this. Let your breath carry you deeper now. As the night deepens around you, as your body settles more completely into rest, we continue this journey through the paradoxes that dissolve thought and reveal something truer than logic can touch. The stories you've heard so far have been preparing you, softening the grip of the thinking mind, inviting you into a different way of knowing. And now, as sleep draws closer, as the boundary between waking and dreaming grows thin, we explore koans that point to something even more subtle, more intimate, more impossible to grasp. Let the darkness hold you. Let these ancient voices whisper their strange wisdom. And if you drift away completely, that's perfect. The teachings work, whether you're awake to hear them or asleep to dream them. In the misty mountains of 13th century China, in a Chan monastery so isolated that supplies arrived only twice a year, there lived a monk named Huiming, whose determination was matched only by his frustration. He had been practicing for 12 years, ever since he'd abandoned his position as a low-level government clerk to pursue what he believed was a higher calling. But after more than a decade of dedicated effort, he still felt like he was on the outside looking in, watching other monks experience breakthroughs he couldn't access. Huiming had grown up in a provincial town where his father ran a small shop selling writing implements, brushes, ink, paper to scholars and students. From childhood, Huiming had been taught to value precision, correctness, getting things right. His father would test him constantly, holding up a brush and asking him to identify the type of hair, the quality of the binding, the appropriate use. Wrong answers brought disapproval. Right answers brought a brief nod and the next question. This training had served Huiming well as a clerk. He was meticulous with records, careful with correspondence, reliable in his duties. But it had also created in him a deep anxiety about making mistakes, about not understanding, about being wrong. When he'd first encountered Buddhist teachings and heard about enlightenment, he'd approached it the same way he approached everything else, as a problem to solve correctly. A test to pass, a skill to master through careful study and practice. The monastery where Huiming practiced was led by an elderly master named Linji, who was known for his paradoxical teaching style and his willingness to use any method, even shocking or seemingly harsh ones, to jolt students out of their habitual patterns. Linji had been teaching for 40 years, and despite his age, he still possessed a fierce energy that could be both terrifying and exhilarating. Huiming had sought private meetings with Master Linji dozens of times over the years, always coming with questions about his practice, always hoping the master would confirm that he was doing it right, that he was making progress, that enlightenment was just around the corner if he could just understand this one more thing. And every time, Master Linji would give him answers that made no sense, or would suddenly shout at him, or would simply sit in silence until Huiming, uncomfortable and confused, would bow and leave. Huiming knew this was supposed to be teaching, but he couldn't figure out what he was supposed to learn. It felt like taking a test where all the questions were in a language he didn't speak. One cold winter evening, after a particularly difficult meditation session where his mind had been absolutely wild with thoughts and his body racked with pain from the cold, Huiming found himself standing outside Master Linji's quarters, shivering in the darkness, trying to work up the courage to knock. He was at the end of his rope. 12 years of practice, and he felt no closer to awakening than when he'd started. Maybe he just wasn't cut out for this. Maybe he should give up, go back to being a clerk, stop torturing himself with something he apparently couldn't achieve. He knocked, half hoping the master wouldn't answer. But Linji's voice came immediately. "Enter." Huaiming slid open the door and stepped into the small warm room where a brazier glowed with coals. Master Linji was sitting near the heat, wrapped in a thick robe, drinking tea. He looked at Huaiming with those sharp old eyes and said, "You look miserable. Sit down, have some tea." Huaiming sat, accepted the cup of tea gratefully, felt the warmth spreading through his frozen hands. For a moment they sat in silence, just the sound of the brazier's coals settling, the wind outside, their breathing. Finally Linji said, "So, you've come to tell me you're quitting." Huaiming's head snapped up. "How did you know? You've been hovering outside my door for 10 minutes, radiating despair. It's not difficult to guess." Linji poured himself more tea. "So, are you quitting?" "I don't know, Master. I think maybe I should. 12 years and I haven't awakened. I haven't had any breakthrough experiences. I haven't understood any of your teachings. I try so hard. I practice so diligently, but nothing happens. Maybe I'm just not capable of this." Linji sipped his tea. "Tell me something, Huaiming. Right now, in this moment, who is the one who thinks he hasn't awakened?" Huaiming blinked. "I am. I'm the one who hasn't awakened. Show me this I who hasn't awakened. Point to it." "Where is it?" Huaiming gestured vaguely at himself. "It's me, my mind, myself." "Your mind? Where is your mind? In your head? In your chest? Show me exactly where this mind is that hasn't awakened." Huaiming tried to locate his mind. He knew thoughts seemed to happen in his head, but was his mind really in his head? When he felt emotions, they seemed to be in his chest or his belly. When he made decisions, where did those come from? The more he tried to pinpoint the location of his mind, the more elusive it became. I can't point to it exactly, but I know it's there. I know I'm thinking, I'm experiencing, I'm the one who's frustrated and discouraged. So you can't find this mind, but you're absolutely certain it exists and that it hasn't awakened. Interesting. Linji leaned forward slightly. "Let me ask you differently. Right now, are you aware?" "Yes, of course." "What are you aware of?" "I'm aware of sitting here, of the warmth of the room, of talking with you, of drinking tea, of my frustration." "Stop," Linji said. "Who is aware of all these things?" "I am." "Show me this I that is aware." Again, Huaiming tried to locate it. There was awareness, clearly awareness of the room, of sensations, of thoughts, of emotions. But who or what was doing the being aware? He couldn't find a separate self that was watching. There was just awareness, experience happening, but no one he could point to as the experiencer. I can't find it. But there must be someone who's aware. Otherwise, who's having this experience? Linji laughed, a sharp bark of amusement. There you go again. You can't find this I, but you insist it must exist. You're like someone searching everywhere for their glasses while wearing them on their face. You're looking for the one who is aware, but you're already the awareness doing the looking. I don't understand. Master. Of course you don't understand. Understanding requires a subject and an object, someone who understands, and something to be understood. But what I'm pointing to isn't an object that can be understood. It's the subject itself, the awareness itself, what you actually are before you label yourself as huiming, or monk, or someone who hasn't awakened. Linji set down his teacup and looked directly at Huiming with an intensity that was almost physical. Listen carefully. Right now, in this moment, thoughts are appearing. Yes, yes. And you're aware of those thoughts? Yes. So the thoughts appear in awareness. They come and go, but the awareness remains, watching them. Now, this awareness, does it need to achieve enlightenment? Huiming started to answer, then stopped. The awareness itself, did it need enlightenment? The thoughts in awareness might be anxious or discouraged, might believe they needed enlightenment, but the awareness that held those thoughts, that witnessed them, did it need anything? I don't know. Look, Linji said, his voice softening. Right now, awareness is here. Right now, experience is happening. Right now, life is being lived. This awareness doesn't come and go, it's constant, always present. Thoughts come and go within it. Emotions come and go within it. The belief, I haven't awakened, comes and goes within it. But awareness itself is always here, unchanged. So, awareness is already awakened. No, Linji's voice was sharp again. Awareness doesn't need to be awakened because it was never asleep. Awakening and non-awakening are thoughts appearing in awareness. The awareness itself is prior to both. Before the concepts, before the whole game of seeking and finding, he leaned back, wrapping his robe tighter. You've spent 12 years trying to achieve something, trying to become someone who has awakened. But you're already the awareness in which all that trying appears. You're already what you've been seeking. The problem isn't that you haven't awakened. The problem is you believe you haven't, and that belief obscures what's already here. But Master, if I'm already awakened, why do I feel so confused? Why am I suffering? Are you suffering right now? In this exact moment? Huiming checked. Right now, sitting in the warm room, drinking tea, talking with his teacher, was he actually suffering? Or was he just thinking about suffering? His body was comfortable. The tea was good. The conversation was engaging. The suffering seemed to be in his thoughts about his 12 years of practice, his fears about the future, his comparisons with other monks. But right here, right now, was there actually suffering? Not right now. I guess. Exactly. Suffering is almost always about thoughts. Thoughts about the past. Thoughts about the future. Thoughts about how things should be different. Right now, just this moment, is usually fine. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, you're cold, or in pain, or sick. But even then, it's the thoughts about the discomfort that create suffering. The discomfort itself is just sensation. Linji poured more tea for both of them. So here's the teaching I'm giving you tonight. Stop trying to become awakened. Stop trying to achieve something. Stop trying to be different than you are. Just notice right now. You're aware. That awareness is what you are. Not Haiming the frustrated monk. Not the one who has or hasn't achieved enlightenment. Just pure awareness, knowing this moment. But if I stop trying, won't I just become lazy? Won't I stop practicing? Will you stop breathing if you stop trying to breathe? No, breathing just happens. Exactly. When you recognize what you actually are, this awareness practice happens naturally. Not because you're trying to get somewhere, but because it's the natural expression of awareness taking care of the body-mind it's appearing through. You'll still sit zazen, but not to become enlightened. You'll sit because sitting is what's happening. You'll still work and study and live your life, but not to achieve some future state. You'll do it because it's what's arising in this moment. They sat together in silence for a while. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside, and Huaiming felt something starting to shift, not a dramatic breakthrough, not a sudden enlightenment, but a subtle releasing of the constant striving, the constant measuring himself against some imagined standard. "Master," he said quietly, "I think I've been making this much more complicated than it needs to be." "Of course you have," Linji said with a slight smile. "Your father trained you to always be checking if you're doing it right, always measuring yourself, always worried about making mistakes. So you brought that same anxiety to spiritual practice. You've been treating awakening like a test you need to pass. But awakening isn't about getting the right answer. It's about recognizing that the one asking the question is already free. The one asking the question is already free," Huaiming repeated softly. "Yes, the awareness that's worried about whether it's awakened is the awakened awareness. It's just confused about what it is. It's like the ocean worrying about whether it's wet enough. The ocean is already wet. It's made of water. It can't be not wet. Similarly, you're made of awareness. You can't be not aware. The only question is whether you recognize what you are or whether you're lost in thoughts about what you think you should be." Huiming sat with that for a long time, feeling the truth of it settling into him in a way that words never had before. He wasn't something that needed to become aware. He was awareness itself, already complete, already whole, temporarily confused by thoughts that said otherwise. Finally he said, "Master, what should I do now?" Linji laughed. "What should awareness do? Nothing and everything. Keep living your life. Keep practicing if practice arises. Keep studying if studying arises. But do it from recognition of what you are, not from trying to become something you're not. And when you forget which you will, many times, just notice you've forgotten and remember again. That's all. Just keep remembering what you actually are. That's all? That's everything." Huaiming bowed deeply to his teacher, feeling a gratitude he couldn't express in words. As he walked back to the monk's quarters through the cold night, he found himself noticing something different. Thoughts were still arising, thoughts about the conversation, thoughts about practice, thoughts about tomorrow. But there was a space around them now, an awareness holding them that didn't get caught up in them. The thoughts could come and go, and awareness remained, vast and still and complete. Over the following months and years, Huiming continued his practice at the monastery. To an outside observer, nothing much changed. He still sat zazen, still worked in the gardens, still studied sutras, but internally, everything was different. He was no longer practicing to achieve something. He was practicing as an expression of what he already was. And that subtle shift changed the quality of everything, made his sitting lighter, his work more joyful, his whole life more spacious and free. When other monks would come to him, frustrated with their practice, he would often share what Master Linji had shown him. You're not trying to become aware, you're already awareness. You're just practicing, recognizing what you are. And sometimes, when they really heard it, he could see the same release in their eyes that he'd felt that cold night in Master Linji's room, the recognition that they'd been searching for something they'd never lost, trying to arrive somewhere they'd never left. Years later, when Huiming had become a teacher himself, a young monk once asked him, "Master, what is the essence of the teaching?" And Huiming replied, "Who is asking the question?" The monk looked confused. I'm asking. Show me this, I who is asking." The monk started to point to himself, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. And in that moment of uncertainty, in that gap where he couldn't find the one asking the question, something opened. His face changed, and Huiming smiled, recognizing that ancient shift, that timeless recognition. "Ah," Huiming said softly. "There you are. Breathe slowly now. Feel how your body has become part of the darkness, how the boundary between you and the night has grown soft. That question, who is the one who is aware? Let it dissolve like mist. You don't need to answer it. You don't need to find the one who's listening to these words. Just notice that listening is happening. Awareness is happening. Life is happening through you, as you, being you." What Huiming discovered was what you can discover right now, that you're not a person who has or lacks awareness. You are awareness itself, temporarily believing you're a person. And when that recognition dawns, even for just a moment, everything becomes lighter. Because there's no one who needs to achieve anything. There's just awareness. Being aware, knowing this moment. Right now, thoughts might be floating through that awareness, maybe wondering about the story, maybe planning tomorrow, maybe feeling sleepy or restless. That's fine. The thoughts are just weather passing through the sky of awareness. They don't define you. They don't limit you. They're just movements in the space you are. And if you've forgotten what you are, if you've gotten caught up again in being a person with problems who needs solutions, that's fine too. Just notice. Just remember. You are the awareness noticing that you've forgotten. That awareness was never lost. It's always here, always has been, always will be. Nothing to achieve, nothing to become. Just this awareness, being aware, moment by moment, breath by breath, as your body settles deeper into rest. And as that recognition softens everything, as the night deepens and sleep draws closer, we travel now to ancient Korea, to a different impossible question and another seeker lost in the maze of thought. In the harsh winter mountains of 10th century Korea, in a small hermitage so remote that even other monks rarely visited, there lived a nun named Jin Myung. She had been practicing Sion meditation for 17 years, ever since she'd fled from an intolerable situation in her home village. Her husband, a man 20 years her senior, whom her parents had chosen for her, had been violent when drunk, which was often after 3 years of marriage and 2 miscarriages caused by his beatings. Jin Myung had walked away one night while he slept, traveling for weeks until she found a nunnery that would accept her. The first decade of practice had been a refuge from her trauma. The strict schedule, the physical labor, the hours of meditation, all of it had been healing in its own way, giving her structure and safety she'd never known. But by the 17th year, something had shifted. The peace she'd found felt fragile, dependent on her circumstances. She'd noticed that when things went smoothly, she felt calm. But any disruption, a harsh word from another nun, unexpected pain, a reminder of her past, would send her back into fear and reactivity. She'd been asking herself, after all these years of practice, why am I still so easily disturbed? Why haven't I found the unshakable peace the old texts talk about? What am I missing? The hermitage where Jinmyong now lived was overseen by an ancient teacher named Sosan, a nun who was said to be over 80 years old and who'd been practicing for more than 60 years. Sosan lived mostly in silence, rarely teaching formally, but occasionally accepting a student to live in the hermitage and practice under her minimal guidance. Jinmyong had been there for 3 years, and in all that time, Sosan had spoken to her perhaps 20 times, usually just brief comments about practical matters. But one night, during a fierce winter storm that howled around the hermitage and piled snow against the walls, Jinmyong found herself unable to sleep. Something about the storm was triggering old memories, her husband's rages, the feeling of being trapped, the fear that had defined those years. She was supposed to be past this. She'd practiced for 17 years. Why was she still afraid? She got up from her sleeping mat and found Sosan sitting by the fire in the main room, apparently unfazed by the storm, just sitting peacefully with a small oil lamp burning beside her. "Can't sleep?" Sosan asked, without looking up. "No, Master. The storm." Jinmyong trailed off, not sure how to explain. "Sit," Sosan said, gesturing to a cushion near the fire. Jinmyong sat, grateful for the warmth, for the company, for anything that might settle her agitated mind. They sat in silence for a while, just the sound of the wind and the crackling fire. Finally, Sosan said, "You're afraid." It wasn't a question. Jinmyong nodded, her throat tight. "Tell me," Sosan said, "when you're afraid, where is the fear?" Jinmyong touched her chest. "Here. In my heart, in my stomach. It feels like tightness, like I can't breathe." "And this fear, is it solid or empty? If you cut it open, what would you find inside?" Jinmyong closed her eyes, trying to look at the fear itself rather than just being lost in it. The tightness in her chest, the rapid heartbeat, the churning in her stomach. What were these sensations made of? When she looked closely, she couldn't find any solidity to them. They were just energy moving, tension flowing, sensations arising and shifting. There was nothing solid there, nothing substantial. It's empty, I think. Just sensations. Energy. Good, Sosan said. "And the one who is afraid of this fear, show me that one. Where is the person who is experiencing this fear?" Jinmyong looked for herself, looked for the one who was afraid. She'd done this exercise before in meditation, trying to find the self, but she'd always thought of it as a philosophical investigation. Now, with actual fear coursing through her, it became visceral and immediate. Where was she? The body was here, clearly. The sensations of fear were here. But where was the self that was experiencing it all? She couldn't find it. There were thoughts, "I'm afraid. This shouldn't be happening. I should be past this." But those were just thoughts arising and passing. There were sensations in the body: tightness, rapid heartbeat, churning stomach. But those were just sensations. Where was the self that was supposedly having all this experience? I can't find myself. I can find thoughts and sensations, but I can't find the one who's having them. Exactly, So-san said quietly. So when you say, I am afraid, what do you actually mean? There are sensations of fear arising in a body. There are thoughts about fear arising in a mind. But where is the I that possesses this fear? Where is the self that's suffering? But if there's no self, then who's sitting here talking to you? Who practiced for 17 years? This doesn't make sense. Of course, it doesn't make sense to your thinking mind. The thinking mind needs a self, needs an I to organize experience around. But let me ask you right now, is thinking happening? Yes. Does thinking require a thinker, or does thinking just happen? Like the wind blows and the fire burns? Jin Myung sat with that question. Did thinking require a thinker? It seemed like it should. How could there be thinking without someone doing the thinking? But when she looked directly at the experience, thoughts just appeared. They arose from nowhere, floated through awareness, and disappeared. There was no little person in her head deciding what to think. Thoughts just happened. I guess thinking just happens. Like the wind. Yes. And seeing just happens. Hearing just happens. Fear just happens. All of it, the entire flow of experience just arises and passes. Aries and passes. There's no one making it happen. No one possessing it. No self that owns any of it. There's just the flow itself. But then who am I? If there's no self, what am I? So-san smiled slightly. Who is asking that question? Jin Myung opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. The question was arising, but from where? From whom? She looked and looked, but couldn't find the source. I don't know. Don't know is a good place to rest. So-san said, better than thinking you know. The ancient masters called it great doubt, not the anxious doubt that makes you suffer, but the profound don't know that's willing to look directly at experience without assuming you understand it. She poked at the fire, sending up a spray of sparks. You came to practice 17 years ago seeking peace, seeking safety, and you found some, which is good. But now you're stuck, because you're trying to create a self that's permanently peaceful, permanently safe, permanently beyond suffering. And that self can never be created, because it doesn't exist. You're trying to protect something that was never there in the first place. So, what do I do? Just accept that I'll always be afraid? No. Look directly at what's actually here. Right now, there's a storm. Right now, there are sensations in the body that we label fear. Right now, there are thoughts arising. But is there a separate self experiencing all this? Or is there just the experiencing itself, happening spontaneously, belonging to no one? Jin Myung closed her eyes and looked. There was the sound of wind. There was the warmth of fire. There was tightness in her chest. There were thoughts moving through awareness. But all of it was just happening. There was no center point, no self, no one to whom it was all occurring. Just experience flowing, moment by moment, empty and luminous. It's just happening. No one's doing it. No one's having it. It's just arising and passing. Yes, So-san said softly. And when you see this clearly, when you recognize that there's no self to protect, no one who needs to be safe, no permanent entity that can be damaged, what happens to fear? Jin Myung looked at the sensations again. They were still there, the tightness, the rapid heartbeat. But without a self claiming them, without a story about me being afraid, they were just sensations. Just energy moving through the body. They didn't mean anything. They didn't threaten anything. They were just part of the flow, arising and passing like everything else. The sensations are still there, she said slowly, but the suffering around them is lighter, because there's no one who needs to make them go away. No self who's threatened by them. Exactly. This is the secret the old masters discovered. Suffering requires a self. Pain happens, the body gets hurt, uncomfortable sensations arise, difficult emotions flow through, but suffering, the resistance to pain, the story about how it shouldn't be happening, the fear about what it means, all of that requires a self who's clinging, who's resisting, who's trying to control experience. So-san looked at Jin Myung with eyes that held decades of practice, decades of seeing through the illusion. When you recognize that there's no fixed self, that you're not a separate entity who has experiences, but rather the open space in which experiences arise, then you're free. Not free from pain or difficulty or challenge. Free from the suffering that comes from believing you're a separate self who shouldn't have to experience what you're experiencing. But Master, this recognition, won't I just forget it? Won't I go back to believing I'm a separate self? Of course, So-san said matter-of-factly. The habit of self is strong. You'll forget. You'll get lost in stories about yourself. You'll suffer. And then, if you're practicing, you'll remember to look again. You'll recognize again that there's no one there. Just experience flowing. And gradually, over time, the forgetting becomes less sticky. You forget, but you remember more quickly. The suffering becomes briefer, lighter. She added another log to the fire. This is why we practice. Not to create some permanently awakened self, but to keep recognizing, again and again, that the self we're trying to perfect was never real to begin with. Every time you look and can't find the self, that's awakening. Every time you recognize that experience is just flowing through no one, that's freedom. They sat together in silence as the storm continued to rage outside. But inside, something had settled in Jin Myung. The fear sensations were still present. The body was still activated, still responding to memories and triggers. But there was space around them now. They were just weather passing through, not a statement about who she was or what was wrong with her. Master, she said after a long while, thank you. For what? So-san asked. For showing me that the self I've been trying to heal doesn't exist. That I've been trying to protect something that was never there. I didn't show you anything, So-san said. I just pointed. You looked and saw for yourself. That's the only way it works. No one can see it for you. Jin Myung bowed deeply. As she returned to her sleeping mat, the storm still howling outside, she found that she could rest in a way she hadn't before. Not because circumstances were different, not because the fear was gone, but because she'd seen that there was no one who needed circumstances to be different, no one who needed fear to be gone. Just this moment, just this experience, just this flow of life happening spontaneously, belonging to no one, threatening no one, perfect in its imperfection. In the years that followed, Jin Myung continued to practice in the hermitage, learning from So-san's presence more than from her words. She still had difficult moments, memories would surface, fear would arise, the body would react to triggers. But increasingly, she could recognize these as just events in awareness, not statements about a self that needed to be fixed or protected. The question, where is the self who is suffering, became a constant companion, a gentle inquiry that dissolved identification before it could solidify into suffering. When Sosan eventually died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 86, Jin Myung took over care of the hermitage. She rarely taught formally, like her teacher before her, but when students came seeking answers about how to deal with their pain, their trauma, their persistent reactivity, she would ask them the same questions Sosan had asked her. When you're suffering, where is the one who is suffering? Can you find the self that's in pain, or is there just pain arising in no one, belonging to no one, threatening no one? And sometimes, when they really looked, she could see the same release in their eyes that she'd experienced that stormy night, the recognition that the self they'd been trying to heal, trying to protect, trying to perfect, had never actually existed. That they were free, had always been free, were just temporarily confused about what they were. Let that question rest in you now without trying to answer it. Where is the self? Where is the one who's listening to these words? Don't search for an answer. Just notice that you can't find what you're looking for. Notice that looking is happening, but there's no one doing the looking. Just looking, just awareness, just this moment being itself. And in that not finding, there's a profound rest. Because if there's no self to protect, no fixed identity to maintain, no permanent entity that can be damaged, then what is there to worry about? Experience keeps flowing, sensations arise, thoughts appear, emotions move through, but they're just weather passing through empty sky. Nothing sticks, nothing stays, nothing defines you. You are not the thoughts, you are not the emotions, you are not even the body, though the body is what you're appearing through right now. You are the open awareness in which all of this arises. And that awareness is completely free, completely untouched by whatever passes through it. Let your shoulders drop even more. Let your jaw hang loose. Let your whole body be heavy and supported. There's no one here who needs to hold anything together. No self who needs to be maintained. Just this breathing, just this awareness, just this moment unfolding in beautiful emptiness. And as that recognition deepens, as your body releases into complete rest, we move toward the final teaching of this night. One last, impossible question to dissolve what remains of seeking. In a small village in 15th century Japan, there lived a merchant named Sasaki who dealt in rice, buying from farmers, selling to town markets, arranging transport between regions. He was good at his work, had built a comfortable life, and by the time he was 50, had accumulated enough wealth to semi-retire, leaving most of the daily business to his two sons while he pursued other interests. One of those interests was Zen. Sasaki had always been curious about the monks he'd see occasionally in the marketplace. Their shaved heads and simple robes, their calm presence that seemed so different from the frantic energy of commerce. In his younger years, he'd been too busy building his business to investigate further. But now, with time on his hands and an increasing awareness of his mortality, he'd already lived longer than his father and was seeing friends die with increasing frequency. He felt drawn to explore these teachings. He began visiting a local Zen temple, attending public talks, sitting in meditation sessions open to lay people. The teacher there, a monk named Bankei, was known for his straightforward teaching style and his willingness to work with lay people, not just monastics. Bankei didn't emphasize complex philosophy or secret teachings. He spoke simply about what he called the unborn, the pristine awareness that was present before thoughts arose, that witnessed all experience without being touched by it. Sasaki found these talks fascinating, but he struggled to understand what Bankei was pointing to. The unborn? What did that mean? Everything Sasaki knew was born, lived, and died. That was just the nature of existence. How could there be something unborn? And if there was, how could he experience it? After attending talks for several months, Sasaki requested a private meeting with Bankei. The monk agreed, and one quiet afternoon, Sasaki found himself sitting across from the teacher in a small, simple room in the temple. "Master Bankei," Sasaki began formally, "I've been attending your talks and trying to understand your teaching about the unborn. But I confess, I don't grasp it. Everything I know myself, my body, my thoughts, my world, all of it was born and will die. What is this unborn you speak of?" Bankei looked at him with gentle eyes. "Tell me, Sasaki-san, right now, as you're sitting here asking me this question, are you aware?" "Yes, of course." "And this awareness, when was it born?" Sasaki thought about that. When had he become aware? He could remember being aware as a child. He assumed he'd been aware as an infant, though he had no specific memories. Before birth, he had no idea. "I suppose I became aware when I was born. When my body was born." "Did you?" Bankei smiled slightly. "Or did the body appear in awareness? Think carefully. You remember being a child. Yes? That child's body, where is it now?" "Gone," Sasaki said. "I'm an old man now. That child's body died and was replaced. So the body you think of as you has been born and died many times. Infant body, child body, young man's body, middle-aged body, old man's body. But the awareness that knows each of these bodies, has that changed? Is the awareness that knew the child's body different from the awareness that knows the old man's body?" Sasaki sat with that question. It was true his body had changed completely many times over. He barely recognized himself in his memories of youth. His thoughts had changed, his beliefs, his circumstances. Everything about his life had transformed multiple times. But the awareness that witnessed all these changes, was that different? He couldn't say it was. The quality of awareness seemed the same. It was just awareness, pure and simple, knowing whatever appeared. It had been there in childhood, in youth, in middle age, now in old age. Constant, unchanging. I suppose the awareness seems the same. But surely it was born with my body and will die with my body. "Will it?" Bankei asked. "How do you know? Have you ever experienced awareness being born? Have you ever experienced awareness dying?" "Well, no. But when I'm in deep sleep, there's no awareness, right? So awareness can cease." "Are you sure?" Bankei leaned forward slightly. "Think carefully. When you wake from deep sleep, how do you know you were asleep? How do you know time passed?" Sasaki thought about that. When he woke in the morning, he knew he'd been asleep. He knew hours had passed. But how did he know? Because he remembered lying down. He remembered the room being dark. And now the room was light, and his body felt rested, and time had clearly passed. I remember going to sleep and then waking up, so time must have passed. Yes, but memory is a thought appearing now. I'm asking about the direct experience. During deep sleep, when there are no thoughts, no dreams, no sense of self, what's actually there? Nothing. I guess, just absence? Is absence something you can experience? Can you experience nothing? Bankei smiled. Or is there just awareness, so subtle and formless in deep sleep that the thinking mind can't grasp it? And so when thinking returns, it says, I was unconscious. I wasn't aware. But awareness was there. Otherwise, how could you know you slept? Sasaki felt something shifting in his understanding, though he couldn't quite articulate it. So you're saying awareness is always present, even in deep sleep? I'm saying awareness is what you are. It's not something you have or don't have. It's not something that comes and goes. It's the constant presence in which everything appears waking, dreaming, sleeping. All states come and go in awareness. And awareness itself is unborn. It never begins, never ends, is never absent, even when there's no one to notice it. But that seems impossible. How can something be there when there's no one to experience it? Bankei said, there's your confusion. You think awareness requires someone to be aware, but it's the other way around. The someone, the sense of being a separate self, appears in awareness. Awareness doesn't belong to the self. The self appears in awareness, like a wave appearing in the ocean. The wave may rise and fall, but the ocean doesn't rise and fall. It's always there, always complete. He poured tea for both of them. This body you think of as yourself, it's like a wave. It arose from the ocean of awareness, will dissolve back into that ocean. But you are not the wave. You are the ocean, temporarily taking the form of a wave, temporarily believing you are only the wave. So when this body dies, Sasaki said slowly, the wave dissolves, the form changes, but the ocean remains. Awareness remains, what you actually are. This unborn awareness never dies because it was never born. Birth and death are events appearing in the unborn, like waves appearing and disappearing in the ocean. Sasaki sat in silence, trying to absorb this. If what Bankei was saying was true, then he'd been asking the wrong questions his whole life. He'd been worried about his death, worried about what would happen to him when his body failed. But if he wasn't actually the body, if he was the awareness in which the body appeared, then what was there to worry about? Master Bankei, he said finally, how do I experience this unborn awareness? How do I know it directly? You're experiencing it right now, Bankei said simply. You've never not been experiencing it. Right now. Are you aware? Yes. That's it. That's the unborn. You are it. You're experiencing it. You've never not been it. The only problem is you think you're something else. You think you're Sasaki the merchant. This body, this mind, this person with a history and a future. And all of that is just appearances in the unborn, like dreams appearing in sleep. The dreamer isn't the dream. The ocean isn't the wave. You are not the person. You are the awareness in which the person appears. But I feel like a person. I have memories, desires, fears. How can all of that just be appearance? Does a dream character feel real while you're dreaming it? Bankei asked. In the dream, you believe completely that you are that character, that the dream world is real, that the dream problems matter. But when you wake up, you realize it was just a dream, just appearances in your sleeping mind. This waking life is the same. It feels completely real. You believe you are this character, this person, but you are not. You are the awareness dreaming this life. Sasaki felt something like vertigo, like the ground was shifting under him. Everything he'd believed about himself, about life, about what mattered, all of it was being questioned. But rather than feeling frightening, it felt oddly liberating. If he wasn't really this person, if all his stories and worries and histories were just appearances in something vaster, then what was there to protect? What was there to fear? So when this body dies, he said again, I don't die. Who is the I you're asking about? Bunkei responded. If you mean Sasaki, the merchant, yes, that character will end. The body will fail. The memories will cease. The person will be gone. But you are not that person. You are the unborn awareness in which that person appeared. And the unborn has no birth, no death, no beginning, no end. It's what remains when everything else is stripped away. They sat together in silence, drinking tea, as the afternoon light slanted through the windows. Sasaki felt himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. The constant anxiety about aging, about death, about whether he'd lived a meaningful life, all of it was loosening its grip. Because if he wasn't the person, if he was the awareness, then none of those concerns touched what he actually was. Over the following years, Sasaki continued to study with Bunkei, continued to investigate this teaching. And gradually, the recognition deepened. More and more often, he would notice that he was resting as awareness itself, not as the person Sasaki. The person still functioned, still ran his business, still interacted with family, still had preferences and opinions, but there was less identification with it, less belief that this temporary character was what he fundamentally was. When Sasaki died at age 68, peacefully in his sleep, his sons found him with a slight smile on his face. They said he'd spent his last years with an unusual lightness, as if some burden he'd carried his whole life had finally been set down. At his funeral, when friends spoke about his life, one of them said, Sasaki seemed to understand something we don't, that death wasn't the end of him, just the end of a character he'd been playing. And knowing that, he played the character beautifully, without the fear that usually comes with knowing the play must end. Let that settle now. Let it dissolve into the darkness around you. You don't need to understand what you've heard. You don't need to figure out the unborn or analyze awareness or achieve any realization. Just notice right now. You are aware. That's all. Just awareness. Being aware. Knowing this moment. That awareness has been with you your whole life. It was there in your childhood, witnessing those early experiences. It was there in your youth, knowing those adventures and mistakes. It's here now, knowing these words, knowing this breath, knowing this darkness. And it will be here tomorrow, knowing whatever tomorrow brings. The stories change. The thoughts change. The body changes. Everything you think of as your life is constantly flowing, constantly transforming. But the awareness that knows it all that remains, constant, unchanging. The unborn, never arriving, never leaving, always here, always now. You are not what you think you are. You are not this body that will age and fail. You are not these thoughts that come and go. You are not this person with their history and future. You are the awareness in which all of that appears vast, empty, luminous, free. And if you are that awareness, then what is there to fear? What can hurt you? What can you lose? Forms come and go, but you remain. Experiences arise and pass, but you remain. Even death is just another experience arising in the deathless awareness you are. So rest now as that awareness. Not trying to achieve it or become it or understand it. You already are it. You've always been it. Just stop pretending to be something else. Stop believing you're the wave instead of the ocean. Stop identifying with the dream character instead of the dreamer. Just rest. Just this awareness, being aware, Just this presence, being present. Just this now, being now. Nothing to do, nothing to become, nothing to achieve. Already complete, already whole, already free. Let your body be completely heavy now. Let every muscle release. Let your breath slow and soften until you can barely tell if you're breathing or being breathed. Let the boundary between sleep and waking dissolve completely. You are the unborn. You are the awareness before thoughts. You are the silence between sounds. You are the space in which all of life appears and disappears. And from that space, you can finally rest. Rest now. Sleep now. Let go now. Everything is held in awareness. Everything is safe in the unborn. Everything, including you, is already home. Take one more slow breath. Feel how the darkness has become a companion now. Not something to fear, but something that holds you gently. And as you rest in this vast awareness, as these ancient teachings dissolve into something wordless and peaceful, we have one more journey to make together tonight, one final koan to carry you into the deepest rest. In a remote monastery in 12th century Tibet, high in the Himalayas, where the air was thin and the sky seemed close enough to touch, there lived a monk named Dorje, whose name meant thunderbolt or diamond, that which cannot be destroyed. But Dorje felt anything but indestructible. At 35, after 15 years of intensive practice, he was exhausted, disillusioned, and questioning everything he'd sacrificed to pursue awakening. Dorje had grown up in a nomadic family, herding yaks across the high plateaus, living in tents that moved with the seasons. It had been a hard life, but not an unhappy one. His family was close. The work was meaningful, and there was a simple rhythm to the days that felt satisfying. But when Dorje was 17, a traveling lama had visited their encampment and given teachings that had set Dorje's mind on fire. The lama had spoken of liberation from suffering, of the possibility of awakening to one's true nature, of practices that could transform consciousness itself. Young Dorje, who'd been struggling with questions about the meaning of his life, watching his parents age, seeing animals killed for food, feeling the weight of existence without understanding its purpose, had felt like he'd finally found what he was looking for. Against his parents' wishes, he'd left the nomadic life and entered a monastery. The first years had been thrilling, learning to read and write, studying sacred texts, practicing meditation for hours each day, feeling himself change and grow. He'd had experiences in meditation that seemed profound moments of bliss, visions of deities, sensations of vast spaciousness. These had convinced him he was on the right path. That awakening was just around the corner. But as the years passed, those experiences had become less frequent. The bliss faded. The visions stopped coming. And Dorje was left with just himself, still anxious, still confused, still suffering in all the ways he'd suffered before, just with more philosophical knowledge about why suffering existed. The gap between what the teachings promised and what he actually experienced grew wider and wider, until he felt like he'd wasted the best years of his life chasing something that didn't exist. The monastery where Dorje practiced was led by an old lama named Rinchen, who was said to have spent 20 years in solitary retreat in a cave and emerged with deep realization. Rinchen rarely taught formally, mostly just overseeing the monastery's operations and occasionally meeting with individual students. Dorje had requested meetings with him several times over the years, but Rinchen had always been too busy or had simply sent word that Dorje should continue his practice. But one afternoon, after a particularly difficult meditation session where Dorje had sat for 3 hours, wrestling with doubt and self-judgment, He found himself standing outside Rinchen's quarters, his heart pounding, determined to finally get some answers or else leave the monastery entirely. He knocked, expecting to be turned away as usual. But Rinchen's voice came immediately. "Enter, Dorje." Dorje slid open the door and stepped into the simple room where Rinchen sat on a meditation cushion, a butter lamp flickering beside him, a window looking out over the mountains. The old Lama looked ancient. His face was deeply weathered, his body thin, but his eyes were clear and present in a way that was almost startling. "Sit," Rinchen said, gesturing to a cushion across from him. Dorje sat, his mind racing with everything he wanted to say, all the questions he'd been carrying for years. But now, faced with the Lama's steady gaze, he didn't know where to begin. "You're suffering," Rinchen said simply. It wasn't a question. Dorje nodded, his throat tight. "Tell me about it." The words came tumbling out, all the frustration, the disappointment, the growing certainty that he'd made a terrible mistake leaving his family, the fear that he'd wasted his life, the exhaustion of trying so hard for so long with nothing to show for it. He spoke for perhaps 10 minutes, hardly pausing for breath, and when he finally stopped, he felt emptied out, raw, vulnerable. Rinchen sat quietly for a moment, then said, "So you've been practicing for 15 years to become awakened?" "Yes." "And in those 15 years, have you become awakened?" "No." "That's the problem. That's why I'm here. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong." Rinchen poured butter tea from a pot that sat warming by the lamp, handed a cup to Dorje. "Let me tell you a story. When I was young, around your age, I had the same frustration. I'd been practicing for many years and felt I'd gotten nowhere. So I went to my teacher and told him I was giving up, that clearly I didn't have what it took to awaken. My teacher looked at me and asked, "What is it that awakens?" I said, I'm trying to awaken." He said, "Show me this I that needs to awaken." I pointed to myself. He said, "That's a body." "Does the body awaken?" I said. "No, the mind awakens." He said, "Show me this mind that awakens." I tried to point to my head. He laughed and said, "That's a skull with a brain in it. Show me the mind." Rinchen sipped his tea. I couldn't show him the mind. I couldn't find it. And he said, "If you can't find the mind that needs to awaken, and you can't find the self that's trying to awaken, then who exactly is practicing? Who exactly is failing? Who exactly needs to achieve anything?" Dorje felt a flicker of something interest, maybe, or hope. What happened then? I was confused for a long time. But gradually I started to understand what he was pointing to. I'd been thinking of awakening as something a self achieves, like climbing a mountain, where you start at the bottom and work your way to the top and eventually reach the summit. But that whole framework was wrong. There is no self to climb the mountain. There is no mountain to climb. There is no summit to reach. The whole thing is a kind of dream, a story we tell ourselves. "Then what's the point of practice?" Dorje asked, feeling his frustration rising again. "If there's no self and nothing to achieve, why did I spend 15 years sitting on a cushion?" "Good question," Rinchen said. "Why did you?" Because I was told that's how you awaken. That's what all the texts say. That's what the teachers teach." Yes. But why did you believe them? Why did you think you needed to awaken?" Dorje thought about that. Why had he believed the traveling Lama all those years ago? Because I was suffering. because life felt meaningless and painful, and I wanted it to be different. Ah, Rinchen said softly. There it is. You wanted life to be different. You wanted yourself to be different. You wanted to escape from what is and arrive at something better. That's what all seeking is, a rejection of this moment, this experience, this self, in favor of some imagined future moment when everything will finally be okay. Yes, exactly. That's what I wanted. And after 15 years, nothing has changed. I'm still suffering. Life is still hard. So the practice doesn't work. Or, Rinchen said, the practice works perfectly, but not in the way you expected. Tell me, Dorje, right now, in this moment, are you suffering? Dorje checked. Right now, sitting in this warm room, drinking butter tea, having this conversation, was he actually suffering? His body was comfortable. The tea was good. The conversation was engaging. The suffering seemed to be in his thoughts about the past 15 years, his fears about having wasted his life, his disappointment about not achieving awakening. But right here, right now, in the direct experience of this moment, was there suffering? Not right now, I guess. Exactly. Suffering is almost always in time, in thoughts about the past or future, in the story about how things should be different than they are. Right now, this moment, is usually okay. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's difficult. But the added layer of suffering, the mental anguish, comes from resisting what is, from wanting this moment to be different. Rinchen set down his cup. So here's what I want you to understand. You've spent 15 years trying to achieve a state called awakening, where you'll finally be free from suffering. But awakening isn't a state. It's not something you arrive at in the future. It's the recognition, right here and now, that you are already free. You've always been free. You're just believing thoughts that say you're not. But I don't feel free, Dorje protested. What does freedom feel like? Rinchen asked. Describe it to me. Dorje tried to imagine it. It would feel peaceful, content, not wanting anything to be different. And if you're not feeling peaceful right now, if you're wanting things to be different, does that mean you're not free? Yes? No, Rinchen said firmly. That's the trap. You're free to feel peaceful or free to feel discontent. You're free to want things to be different or free to accept them as they are. Freedom isn't a particular emotional state. It's the space in which all states arise. You are that space. You've always been that space. You're just identifying with the weather passing through the space, thinking the clouds are what you are. He leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something else. When you were a child, herding yaks with your family, before you heard about Buddhism or awakening or practice, were you free then? Dorje thought back to those early years. He'd had his share of difficulties, cold winters, harsh work, occasional conflicts with his siblings. But there had also been moments of pure joy, playing in the summer grass, learning to ride, sitting by the fire at night, listening to his father's stories. Had he been free then? I suppose. I was just living. I wasn't thinking about whether I was free or not. I was just doing what needed to be done each day. Exactly, Rinchen's eyes lit up. You were just living, not divided between what you were and what you should be. Not trying to become something different, just naturally being yourself, responding to life as it came. That's freedom. Not a special state you achieve through practice, but the natural state you're in when you're not believing thoughts about needing to be somewhere else. So you're saying I was already awakened as a child, before I ever started practicing? I'm saying that what you call awakening is your natural state. It's not something you achieve. It's what's here when you stop trying to achieve anything. When you stop dividing yourself into me now and the awakened me I'm trying to become. When you stop resisting this moment and just allow yourself to be as you are. Dorje sat with that for a long time, feeling something shifting in his understanding. All these years, he'd been trying to become something he wasn't, trying to achieve a state he didn't have, trying to get somewhere other than here. And in all that striving, he'd missed the simple fact of being alive, being aware, being exactly what he was in each moment. But Master Rinchen, he said slowly, if I'm already free, if I'm already awakened, then why do I still suffer? Why do I still feel anxious and confused and disappointed? Because you believe thoughts that say you're not free. Because you identify with the story of being Dorje, who isn't awakened yet, who needs to become awakened. That identification creates suffering, not because you're actually not free, but because you believe you're not. Rinchen stood up, his old joints cracking, and walked to the window. He looked out at the mountains, their peaks catching the late afternoon light. Come here, he said. Dorje joined him at the window. Together, they looked out at the vast landscape, mountains upon mountains stretching to the horizon, valleys shadowed in blue, the sky enormous and clear. Look at those mountains, Rinchen said. Are they trying to be mountains? No, they just are mountains. Are they suffering because they're not awakened mountains? Dorje smiled slightly despite himself. No, they're just being exactly what they are, moment by moment. Weather comes, they're mountains in the storm. Sun comes, they're mountains in the sun. Seasons change, they change with the seasons. But they're always just completely, utterly mountains. Not trying to be anything else. Not suffering because they're not something different. He turned to look at Dorje. You're like those mountains. You're already completely yourself. Already whole. Already free. The only problem is you're believing thoughts that say you're not. You're believing the story that you're a separate self who needs to achieve something. But that self is just a thought. Just a story. The real you, the awareness in which that story appears, was never bound, never needed liberation, is already and always free. Then why practice? Dorje asked. If I'm already free, what's the point of meditation, of study, of any of this? To remember what you are, Rinchen said simply. You keep forgetting. You keep getting lost in the story of being a separate self who's suffering and needs to be fixed. Practice is just the reminder. Again and again, this is what you are. Not the story, not the self. This awareness, this presence, this space in which everything arises. And gradually, with practice, you forget less often. You remember more quickly. The suffering becomes lighter because you're not taking it so personally anymore. He put a hand on Dorje's shoulder. You haven't wasted 15 years. You've spent 15 years learning to recognize what you are. And now you're here, at a crucial point. You can continue trying to achieve awakening, which will just create more suffering because you'll keep failing to achieve what you already are. Or you can relax into recognizing that you're already it. Already free. Already home. And from that recognition, your practice becomes not a striving, but a celebration. Not an effort to get somewhere, but an expression of what's already here. Dorje felt tears on his face, though he hadn't noticed when he'd started crying. Something was releasing in him years of striving, of self-judgment, of feeling inadequate. "I don't know how to do that," he whispered. "I don't know how to stop trying and just be." "You're already doing it," Rinchen said gently. "Right now, you're not trying. You're just being. Tears are flowing, you're not making them flow. Breath is breathing, you're not forcing it. Awareness is aware, you're not creating it. It's all just happening naturally. That's what freedom looks like. Not some special state where you control everything perfectly. Just this natural arising and passing of experience, belonging to no one, controlled by no one, just happening. They stood together at the window as the light gradually faded from the mountains. And Dorje understood, in a way that had nothing to do with concepts or philosophy, that he'd been free all along. That the child herding yaks had been free. That the young monk having visions had been free. That the disappointed practitioner questioning everything had been free. All of it was just life being itself. Awareness being aware. Freedom expressing itself in 10,000 forms. "What do I do now?" he asked after a long silence. "What are you doing now?" Rinchen replied. "I'm standing here, looking at mountains, being aware. Then do that. And then do the next thing. And the next. Just live your life. Dorje. Stop trying to live some other, better, more awakened life. This is it. This is the awakened life. You're living it right now. You've been living it all along." In the years that followed, Dorje continued to practice at the monastery. To an outside observer, nothing much changed. He still sat, meditation, still studied texts, still did his assigned work. But internally, everything was different. He was no longer practicing to achieve something. He was practicing as an expression of what he already was. The meditation wasn't trying to create a special state, it was just resting as awareness. The study wasn't trying to accumulate knowledge, it was just enjoying the play of ideas. The work wasn't trying to earn merit, it was just responding to what needed doing. He still had difficult moments, still felt anxiety, still experienced doubt, still struggled sometimes with the harshness of life. But there was less suffering around those experiences because he was less identified with them. They were just weather passing through, not statements about who he was or whether he was awakened. When Dorje was 50, 20 years after that conversation with Rinchen, a young monk came to him in distress, saying he'd been practicing for 5 years and felt he was getting nowhere, that maybe he wasn't cut out for the path. And Dorje smiled, remembering himself at that age, and asked the young monk, "What is it that needs to get somewhere? Show me this self that's trying to awaken." The young monk looked confused. I'm trying to awaken. Show me this, Dorje said gently. Point to it. Where is the self that's trying to become awakened? And he watched as the same recognition that had dawned in him 20 years before began to dawn in the young monk's eyes, the recognition that there was no one there who needed to achieve anything, that freedom was already here, had always been here, was just waiting to be noticed. Let those words dissolve now into the silence they came from. Let the stories fade like dreams at dawn. You don't need to hold on to any teaching, any concept, any understanding. All of it was just pointing back to what you are, what you've always been, what you can never not be. Right now, you are awareness itself. Not a person who has awareness, not a self who's trying to become more aware. Just awareness, being aware, knowing this moment. That awareness has no problems. It doesn't need to become awakened because it was never asleep. It doesn't need to become free because it was never bound. It's just here, vast and empty and luminous. The space in which everything, including the sense of being a person who needs to awaken, appears and disappears. Your whole life has been awareness being aware. Every experience you've ever had, joyful or painful, ordinary or extraordinary, has been awareness, knowing itself through that experience. You've never been separate from it. You've never lacked it. You've just temporarily believed thoughts that said you were something else, someone else, somewhere else. But you're not somewhere else. You're here. You've always been here. This awareness, this presence, this now, this is what you are. Not what you will become. Not what you're trying to achieve. What you already, always, timelessly are. So stop seeking. Stop striving. Stop trying to become anything other than what you are right now. Just rest as awareness. Just be as presence. Just allow this moment to be exactly as it is, knowing that you, the real you, the awareness you, is completely free, completely whole, completely at peace. Let your body be heavy. Let your breath be soft. Let your mind be however it is thinking or quiet, peaceful or restless, understanding or confused. All of it is just weather in the vast sky of awareness. And you are that sky, unchanged by any weather, untouched by any storm, eternally clear, eternally free. Nothing to do, nothing to become, nothing to achieve. Already complete, already home, already awake. Rest now. Sleep now. Let go now, completely. The seeking is over. The journey is finished. You've arrived where you've always been. Welcome home. These are the stories we've traveled through tonight, ancient paradoxes and impossible questions, each one pointing to something that can't be grasped, but can be recognized, can't be understood, but can be lived. We've heard the sound of one hand clapping, which is the sound of everything and nothing, the sound of awareness meeting itself. We've seen the dog's Buddha nature, which is not something possessed, but something lived. Not a quality to acquire, but a completeness that's already here. We've found our original face before our parents were born, which is not a face at all, but the awareness that witnesses all faces, all forms, all lives. We've learned that eating is just eating when we're fully present. That awakening isn't about achieving special states, but about being completely here for ordinary life. We've discovered that the one who seeks awakening can't be found, that suffering requires a self, and that self is nowhere to be located when we look directly. We've rested in the unborn, the awareness that never arrives and never leaves, that holds all of life without being touched by any of it. These teachings came from Japanese Zen masters and Chinese Chan teachers, from Korean Seon hermits and Tibetan lamas, from centuries of practice and lifetimes of investigation. But they all point to the same recognition: you are already what you seek. You are already free. You are already whole. You've just been looking in the wrong direction, seeking in the wrong place, believing you were something you never were. Let these teachings work in you now, not as concepts to understand, but as invitations to recognize what's always been true. You don't need to remember the stories. You don't need to recall the details. The essence has already been absorbed, already taken root, already begun its work of dissolving the false and revealing the real. Tomorrow you'll wake to the same life, the same circumstances, the same challenges. Nothing external will have changed. But perhaps you'll meet it differently. Perhaps you'll remember, even for a moment, that you're not the person struggling with life, but the awareness in which that person appears. Perhaps you'll notice that you're already free, already whole, already resting in the peace that was never absent. And if you forget, which you will, because forgetting is what awareness does when it believes it's a person, you can return here. These stories will be here. This invitation will be here. The recognition that you are already home will be waiting, patient and kind, for you to remember it again. May you rest deeply tonight. May these teachings support your sleep and inform your dreams. May you wake tomorrow with some echo of recognition still present, the knowing that you are vast awareness temporarily playing at being a human, eternally free, temporarily believing you're bound, already awakened, temporarily practicing to awaken. May all beings recognize what they are. May all beings rest in their natural freedom. May all beings awaken to the fact that they were never asleep. And may you, right now, in this moment, as your eyes close and sleep takes you, know yourself as you truly are: boundless awareness, birthless presence, the unborn reality in which all of life arises and passes, forever untouched, forever free, forever home. Good night. Rest well. You are already everything you need to be.